Hey guys, tonight we slip through a crack in time, back to an age of stone castles and flickering tapestries, to explore the often brutal, surprisingly complex and utterly fascinating lives of royal women in medieval times. Imagine yourself not in your comfortable bed but on a rough-hewn pallet, the air thick with the smell of wood smoke and something less pleasant you can't quite name. Torches sputter, casting long, dancing shadows on cold, unforgiving stone walls. Whispers in a language you don't understand echo down long corridors. Honestly, if you were suddenly dropped into that world as a princess, your chances of thriving, let alone surviving to a ripe old age with all your wits and limbs intact, well, let's just say you wouldn't want to bet your last gold coin on it. So before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. It really does help the channel. And hey, why not drop your location and what time it is where you are in the comments below? It's always cool to see where everyone's tuning in from. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you register, even before sight, is the cold. A damp, seeping chill that clings to the stone walls of the chamber. A chill that even the roaring fire in the great hearth across the room can't entirely banish. Then comes the sound, a low rhythmic chanting, interspersed with sharp cries and muttered instructions. Your mother has been in labour for what feels like an eternity, a medieval eternity, where time is measured in the slow burn of tallow candles and the agonising crawl of pain. You're about to be born into a world that has very specific, very rigid expectations for someone of your station, and even more so for your gender. The air in the birthing chamber is thick with the scent of sweat, blood, and a strange mix of herbs. Lavender, perhaps, to calm, and rue, once thought to aid in difficult births. Women bustle around your mother's large canopied bed, a stern-faced midwife, her hands stained, your grandmother, her lips moving in silent prayer, a gaggle of anxious ladies-in-waiting flitting about like nervous sparrows. No men are present here. Childbirth is women's business, a sacred, terrifying, and exclusively female domain. Your father, the king, is likely pacing in a nearby solar, or perhaps feigning disinterest while secretly desperate for news, specifically news of a son. Then, with a final rending agony, you are expelled into this cold, noisy world. A sharp slap on your backside and your first breath is a wail, piercing the tense atmosphere. The midwife, a woman whose face has seen more winters than the oldest oak in the courtyard, peers at you closely in the flickering light. She cleans you roughly with a linen cloth, examines your tiny limbs, your squalling mouth. Then she finally proclaims, "A healthy girl, praise be to God." A collective sigh ripples through the room, a complex sound, relief that the ordeal is over, that both mother and child have survived the perilous passage of birth. But beneath it, for some, an undeniable undercurrent of, well, let's call it managed expectations. It's not quite the gender reveal party your parents were hoping for. No blue smoke, no cannons, just a girl. Your mother, pale and utterly exhausted, might offer a weak smile, or perhaps her eyes will fill with a different kind of tears. She knows, better than anyone, what this means. Another daughter, when the kingdom craves a prince. You see, in this era, a son is a direct continuation of the dynasty, an heir to the throne, a future warrior and leader. A daughter, you're a valuable commodity, yes, but in a different way. You're a pawn on the great dynastic chessboard of Europe, a future bride to be traded for an alliance, a peace treaty, or a strategically important piece of land. Your value is in your womb, your bloodline, and your ability to link your father's house with another powerful family. It's a heavy burden for such a tiny creature still slick with the vestiges of the womb. As for an epidural for your mother, forget it. Her pain relief probably consisted of some bitter herbs, a relic of a saint pressed to her belly, and a stern lecture on enduring suffering for the good of her soul and the kingdom. Fun times. Almost immediately the discussions begin, albeit in hushed tones. Is she strong? Does she resemble the king, or her mother's line? An astrologer might have already been consulted, his charts drawn up based on the anticipated time of birth, predicting your fortunes, your character, your future. A common mainstream historical fact is that royal births were often meticulously documented, and horoscopes cast by court astrologers were taken very seriously, influencing decisions about a child's upbringing, and even future marriage prospects. Sometimes, if a child was born sickly, or if the birth was particularly inauspicious, a hurried baptism would take place right there in the birthing chamber, lest your tiny, unblemished soul be lost to limbo. You'll be swaddled tightly, a practice believed to help your limbs grow straight and strong, though it probably just makes you feel like a tiny, enraged sausage. Then you'll likely be handed off not to your mother, but to a wet nurse. It was incredibly common for royal and noble women not to breastfeed their own children. There were several reasons for this. It was thought to be physically draining, preventing the queen from conceiving again quickly, and producing that all-important male heir was priority number one. Plus, there was a belief that the mother's colostrum, the first milk, was unhealthy, or that the qualities of the nurse, her temperament, her health, even her moral character, could be passed to you through her milk. So, a robust, healthy peasant woman, recently delivered of her own child, would be brought in, her own baby perhaps sent away or given less attention, so she could dedicate herself to you, the royal infant. Your father, the king, might make a brief, almost ceremonial appearance once you're cleaned up and presentable. He'll peer at you, perhaps prod you gently with a finger, his mind already calculating dowry possibilities versus the urgent need for a male heir. Talk about a tough performance review from day one. Historians still argue whether the level of disappointment at a royal daughter's birth was universally acute across all medieval European courts, or if some cultures and individual families showed more nuanced acceptance, perhaps even quiet relief if the political climate favoured a daughter for a specific alliance. It wasn't always a tragedy, but the preference for a male heir was undeniable and pervasive. And here's a quirky little tidbit for you. In some corners of medieval thought, there were all sorts of theories about how to influence the sex of a child. Some believed it depended on which side of the womb the fetus developed, others on the phases of the moon during conception, or even the diet of the parents. Imagine your royal parents trying to follow some ancient bizarre advice, like the father only eating red meat and drinking strong wine, or the mother consuming delicate white foods, all in a desperate attempt to pre-select a boy. It sounds a bit like a medieval version of those old wives' tales for gender prediction, just with higher stakes and probably less scientific basis than even a BuzzFeed quiz. So, there you are, a tiny, vulnerable princess, born into a world of stark contrasts, immense privilege and crushing expectation, silken sheets and cold stone, whispered prayers and the distant clang of steel. Your life, from this very first breath, is not truly your own. It belongs to the dynasty, to the kingdom, to the intricate and often brutal game of power that will shape your every waking moment. The celebrations for your birth will be tempered, the joy carefully measured, but you are here, a new life, a royal daughter, and your journey, with all its potential for splendour and sorrow, has just begun. Your infancy, spent largely in the care of the wet nurse, eventually gives way to the more structured, if still cosseted, environment of the royal nursery. You are surrounded by a phalanx of women. Your governess, often a noble woman of impeccable reputation and stern demeanour, various ladies-in-waiting, perhaps some older, some younger, who serve as companions and examples, and a host of servants dedicated to your care. Forget the brightly coloured plastic toys and interactive learning apps of a modern childhood. Your playthings might include a finely crafted wooden horse, a doll dressed in miniature court fashions, a subtle lesson in itself, or perhaps you'll be allowed to help with small supervised tasks that mimic adult responsibilities. Your brothers, if you have them, will already be on a different track, their days increasingly filled with weapons practice, horsemanship, and the rough-and-tumble tutelage of knights and masters-at-arms. Your path, however, is distinctly and deliberately different. The days begin to follow a predictable rhythm, a routine centred on devotion, deportment, and domestic arts. Your formal education, such as it is, commences almost as soon as you can string a sentence together and hold a needle, however clumsily. There's no concept of kindergarten or preschool here. Your classroom is likely a well-lit solar, a private chamber reserved for the ladies of the household, or perhaps a quiet alcove in the castle, away from the main bustle. The curriculum is narrow, but rigorously enforced. First and foremost, you are immersed in the world of needle and thread. This is not merely a charming pastime, a way to while away the hours. For a royal woman in medieval times, proficiency in needlework is a cornerstone of her education, a tangible display of her virtue, patience and domesticity. You start with simple stitches, your small fingers guided by your governess or a specialist needlewoman. Hours are spent hunched over a piece of linen, practicing again and again, your back stiff, your eyes watering in the often inadequate light from a high window or a flickering candle. You'll progress from basic samplers, proudly displaying your mastery of different stitches, to more ambitious projects. Perhaps you'll contribute to a section of a vast tapestry depicting a heroic battle scene, glorifying your male relatives naturally, or embroider intricate patterns on an altar cloth for the castle chapel, or create delicate embellishments for clothing. These creations are far more than decorative. They are a testament to your upbringing, a silent advertisement of your suitability as a future queen. And let's be honest, if you ever find yourself unexpectedly confined, say, in a remote tower waiting for a political situation to resolve itself, a scenario not entirely unheard of for medieval ladies, at least you'll have a marketable skill, or at least something to stop you from talking to the mice. Parallel to this practical instruction, and arguably even more important, is your religious education. Piety is not optional, it is foundational. From your earliest coherent thoughts, you are taught your prayers, the responses for Mass, and the importance of confession and communion. You attend religious services daily, perhaps multiple times a day, in the family chapel. The lives of the saints, particularly female saints renowned for their purity, obedience, and unwavering faith, like St. Agnes or St. Catherine, are presented to you as the ultimate exemplars of womanly virtue. Your personal chaplain or a learned nun might be tasked with your spiritual instruction, ensuring you understand the tenets of the faith, the hierarchy of the church, and the vital role of a devout queen in setting a moral example for the kingdom. The church is not just a spiritual guide, it's a colossal political and social force, and your visible piety is a crucial asset to your family. Now, what about reading and writing, the hallmarks of a more academic education? Here, things become a little more nuanced. You will almost certainly be taught to read, at least in your native vernacular language. A mainstream historical fact is that literacy rates among aristocratic women in the high and late Middle Ages were often surprisingly high, sometimes exceeding those of their male peers who were not destined for the church. Your primary reading materials, however, will be carefully selected. The Psalter, containing the Book of Psalms, is a common starting point. Later, you might graduate to a Book of Hours, a personal prayer book, often lavishly illuminated and a significant status symbol in itself. These books, with their vibrant miniatures and ornate calligraphy, are treasures. Beyond religious texts, you might be permitted to read, or more likely have read to you, chivalric romances, tales of valorous knights and virtuous ladies, or perhaps moralizing poems. However, anything considered too frivolous, too worldly, or God forbid, too intellectually stimulating in a dangerous way would be kept far from your reach. The ability to write is less consistently taught. Some royal women certainly became proficient writers, corresponding with family, managing estates, or even, in rare cases, composing their own literary works. But for many, writing was considered a more specialised, almost secretarial skill, not strictly necessary for a queen who would have clerks and scribes at her disposal. The primary aim of your literacy is to enable you to read your devotional texts, perhaps to understand household accounts if you are ever in a position of managing a large establishment, and to decipher formal communications. Intellectual curiosity for its own sake is not generally encouraged. Your learning is functional, designed to fit you for your future role. Other accomplishments are also cultivated. You will learn to sing, and perhaps to play a musical instrument like the harp, the lute, or the psaltery. Music and dancing are integral to court life, and a queen who can entertain gracefully is an asset. You'll be taught the intricate steps of formal court dances, no wild flailing here, but measured, elegant movements that display grace and refinement. You might also learn the basics of herbalism, not to become a physician, but to understand simple remedies for common ailments within your household. And of course, you'll be schooled in the complex web of courtly etiquette, how to address everyone from a visiting emperor to a lowly page, the correct forms of curtsy, when to speak and when to remain silent. It's a performance, and you are learning your lines and cues from a very young age. A rather quirky tidbit concerning medieval education is the concept of the via stronasti, or path of grace, harmony. Found in some Eastern European princely courts, which alongside religious texts and basic literacy, emphasised almost a choreographed elegance in all movements, from how a princess sat to how she accepted a cup, believing it reflected inner spiritual harmony and suitability for rule. It sounds exhausting, like living in a permanent ballet class. The entire purpose of this carefully curated education is not to empower you as an individual, but to prepare you for marriage and queenship. Your piety is to ensure you're a good Christian influence. Your needlework demonstrates your domesticity and patience. Your musical and dancing skills make you an agreeable consort. Your literacy allows you to fulfill your religious duties and manage correspondence. Historians still argue whether the occasional inclusion of classical texts or more complex theological discussions in some royal women's educations indicates a genuine appreciation for their intellectual capacity, or if it was merely a way to enhance their prestige and make them more fitting companions for highly educated kings or churchmen. Was it about true learning, or just adding another layer of polish to a valuable dynastic asset? The focus is almost invariably on making you a suitable, biddable, and useful partner in the grand game of dynastic alliances. Your own intellectual passions, if you develop any, are secondary to be pursued discreetly if at all. So, these early years are a period of intense, if narrowly focused, training. You are learning to be seen and not heard, unless specifically requested to speak. You are learning to be pious, modest, and accomplished in the feminine arts. You are in essence being meticulously crafted into the ideal medieval princess, ready to be presented on the international marriage market. The world outside your sheltered existence is vast and often brutal, but within these castle walls you're being polished like a precious gem, soon to be set in a crown, though not necessarily your own. The lessons in piety, needlework, and perhaps even that bit of lute playing you are starting to enjoy continue day by day, but you sense a subtle shift in the atmosphere around you. Your governess, always strict, now seems to scrutinise your every move with an even more critical eye. The ladies-in-waiting whisper more amongst themselves, their glances towards you a mixture of pity and something akin to excitement. Important-looking men in sober, expensive robes, men you don't recognise, are seen conferring with your father in hushed, serious tones in the courtyard, or emerging from the council chamber, their faces grave. You might catch snippets of conversations, words like dowry, treaty, the Dauphin, or the Count of Flanders. They mean little to you, abstract concepts from the adult world that seems to operate on a plane far removed from your lessons on the lives of saints, or the best way to stitch a griffin's wing. Then, one crisp autumn morning, the air smelling of wood smoke and decaying leaves, it happens. You're summoned not to the solar for your usual lessons, but to your mother's private apartments. She's there, looking paler than usual, flanked by your father, who attempts a jovial air that doesn't quite reach his eyes, and a stern-faced bishop, his jewelled crucifix glinting in the light from the arrow-slit window. You're perhaps 10, maybe 12 years old, still more child than woman, perhaps with a favourite doll tucked away under your bed, or a secret den in an overgrown part of the castle gardens. Your father clears his throat. "My dear daughter," he begins, and the formal address immediately puts you on alert. "We have momentous news." He speaks of alliances, of the good of the kingdom, of peace secured for generations. He talks of a noble prince, a powerful duke, or even a king from a distant land. He speaks of your future. It takes a few moments for the true meaning of his words to penetrate your youthful understanding. You are betrothed, promised. Your life, which until now has revolved around a predictable, if restricted, routine, has just taken a sharp, irrevocable turn, decided entirely without your input. It's like your parents swiped right for you on the medieval version of a dating app, except the profiles are coats of arms, and the stakes are international peace, not just an awkward coffee date. There is no discussion, no asking for your opinion. This is not a proposal you can ponder. It is a statement of fact, a political manoeuvre in which you are the key piece. You might have never met your intended. You might not even be able to pronounce his name correctly. He could be a boy your own age, or a man old enough to be your grandfather. You might be shown a miniature portrait, a stiff, formal image of a stranger with whom you're now destined to share your life, your bed, and your future children. He looks like he probably doesn't enjoy a good knock-knock joke. Canon law, a mainstream historical fact, stipulated that the minimum age for a valid marriage was 12 for girls and 14 for boys. But betrothals, the formal promise to marry, could take place far earlier. It wasn't uncommon for infants in cradles to be pledged to one another, with the understanding that the marriage would only be solemnised and consummated once both parties reached canonical age. Your own betrothal, even at 10 or 12, means your childhood, such as it was, is effectively over. The lessons will intensify, now with a very specific goal, to prepare you for his court, his customs, his language, if it's different from your own. A formal betrothal ceremony will likely follow, a grand affair designed to publicly cement the alliance. You'll be dressed in new heavy robes of velvet or silk, perhaps in colours symbolic of your new allegiance or your own family's heraldry. You will stand before the bishop, your small hand perhaps placed in the hand of a proxy if your fiancé is not present, an older nobleman representing him. Vows will be exchanged, solemn promises spoken in Latin or formal vernacular, words that bind you irrevocably. There might be an exchange of rings or other symbolic gifts. A quirky, though not universal tidbit, is the exchange of very specific items during these betrothal ceremonies. Sometimes the boy's representative would present the girl with a bejewelled doll, symbolising her youth, but also her future role as a mother, while she might offer a finely embroidered pouch or a small devotional book, signifying her piety and domestic skills. It's all deeply symbolic, a public performance of a private treaty. You might feel a confusing mix of emotions. Fear is almost certainly one of them. Fear of the unknown, of leaving your home, of this stranger you're bound to. There might be a flicker of excitement, fed by the romantic tales you've heard, though the reality of your situation is far removed from those idealised stories of chivalry and courtly love. Mostly, though, you probably feel a profound sense of powerlessness, a dawning awareness that your life is not your own to direct. You're a princess, yes, with silks and jewels, but you're also a pawn, moved across the great chessboard of European politics by hands far more powerful than yours. There's no conscious uncoupling clause in these contracts. The nature of these betrothals meant that you could be engaged for years. Sometimes these long engagements held firm. Other times, shifting political winds meant betrothals were ruthlessly broken, new alliances forged, and you, the princess, might find yourself suddenly unbetrothed and reassigned to a new, more politically convenient fiancé. Imagine the emotional whiplash. One day you're learning Portuguese phrases for Prince João. The next you're being told, "Actually, darling, it's German now for Duke Friedrich. He's got a lovely castle and a beard." Historians still debate the extent to which young royal brides fully comprehended the intricate political machinations behind their betrothals, or if they largely perceived these arrangements through the lens of duty and inevitability, shaped by the societal norms of their time. Did they see themselves as sacrifices for the greater good, or was it simply the expected, albeit daunting, next chapter in a princess's life? The truth likely lies somewhere in between, varying greatly depending on the individual girl, her upbringing, and the specific circumstances of her match. The period between your betrothal and your actual marriage, especially if you are very young, is one of careful preparation and waiting. You are now officially spoken for, a valuable asset whose purity and reputation must be guarded even more fiercely. Your every action is scrutinised, your every word noted. The carefree moments, if there ever truly were any, become fewer and farther between. The weight of expectation settles upon your young shoulders, the expectation to be a dutiful wife, a fertile queen, and a steadfast guarantor of a fragile peace or a powerful alliance. The tapestries you embroider now might even incorporate the coat of arms of your future husband's family, a constant woven reminder of your impending destiny. Your childhood is fading like the light at dusk, and the path ahead, leading to a foreign land and an unknown future, is slowly, inexorably coming into focus. The day you've been dreading, or perhaps, in some small, terrified corner of your heart, anticipating, finally arrives. It's time to leave. Time to say goodbye to the familiar stone walls of your childhood home, the faces you've known your entire life, the very air you breathe. You're probably no older than 14 or 15, perhaps even younger if the political urgency is great. Your dowry, a vast collection of gold, silver, jewels, rich fabrics, and perhaps even land or titles, has been meticulously catalogued and packed into heavy chests. This isn't just a bride price, it's a significant financial and political statement representing your family's wealth and commitment to the alliance. Remember how we talked about your birth and the managed expectations? Well, a hefty dowry could sometimes sweeten the deal if you weren't the longed-for male heir. Your entourage is assembled, a small army in itself, ladies-in-waiting chosen for their loyalty and their ability to support you in the alien environment of your new court, a chaplain to see to your spiritual needs, knights and men-at-arms for protection, servants to manage the baggage, the horses, and the daily necessities of travel. It's a grand procession, but at its heart is you, a young woman leaving everything familiar behind. Your mother, her face a mask of stoic grief, or perhaps offering last-minute advice on how to please your new husband and navigate courtly intrigue, clings to you for a moment. Your father might give a gruff, formal farewell, the weight of the kingdom's future resting in part on your slender shoulders. Your younger siblings, if you have them, might cry, not fully understanding the finality of this departure. The journey itself is an ordeal, a far cry from a comfortable modern road trip with curated playlists and service station snacks. You might travel on horseback if you're accustomed to riding, or perhaps in a litter, an enclosed couch slung between two horses or carried by men. While a litter offers some protection from the elements and prying eyes, it's also a bone-jarring, swaying contraption that could induce severe motion sickness. Imagine being cooped up in a small, stuffy box, jolting along for hours, days, even weeks. There's no air conditioning, no suspension system, just endless, monotonous movement. The roads, where they exist, are often little more than rutted tracks, muddy in winter, dusty in summer. Progress is slow, dictated by the pace of the baggage train and the need to find safe lodging each night. You might stay in castles belonging to allied nobles, in monasteries offering hospitality, or, if no better option is available, in rough inns or even encampments set up by your guards. Each stop brings its own challenges. Unfamiliar food, questionable sanitation. Remember that crocodile dung sunscreen we joked about in another context? Sanitation on the road isn't much better, and the constant awareness of being an outsider, a valuable prize to be protected. Danger is a constant companion. Bandits roam the countryside, eager to prey on wealthy travellers. Political enemies might see your journey as an opportunity to disrupt the alliance, perhaps even to abduct you. Your armed escort is not just for show, they are a vital necessity. The weather itself can be a formidable foe. Sudden storms, deep snows in winter, or scorching summer heat can turn an already arduous journey into a life-threatening one. A mainstream historical fact is that journey times in the medieval period were incredibly long and unpredictable. A trip that might take a few hours by car today could take weeks, or even months, depending on distance, terrain, weather, and the political stability of the regions you pass through. Crossing the Alps in winter, for example, was a terrifying and often deadly undertaking. As you travel, you leave behind not just your home, but your language, your customs, everything that has defined your world. If you're marrying into a foreign court, you've hopefully spent the last few years frantically trying to learn the basics of their language, but classroom phrases are a poor substitute for the rapid-fire, nuanced speech of native speakers. The food will be different, the style of dress, the music, the very way people interact. It's a profound culture shock, experienced by a young woman often isolated from her own familiar support system, save for the few attendants who travel with her. Think about the mental toll. Each day takes you further from home and closer to an unknown future, an unknown husband. There's no turning back. You're the living embodiment of a treaty, a symbol of peace or power. The weight of this responsibility, coupled with the physical discomfort and inherent dangers of the journey, must have been immense. And let's be frank, a teenage girl, even a princess, is still a teenage girl. She probably misses her friends, her favourite horse, the familiar view from her bedroom window. She's likely scared, lonely and homesick, even if she's been trained her whole life to show a brave, impassive face to the world. A quirky and rather poignant detail about these journeys is the comfort caravan some high-status brides had. This might include not just essential personnel and goods, but also personal items designed to ease the transition. Perhaps a few favourite books, a beloved musical instrument, or even a caged pet bird, a small piece of home to carry into a strange new world. It highlights the very human need for familiarity and comfort, even amidst the grandeur and political imperative of a royal marriage journey. During these long weeks on the road, your attendants are your lifeline. Your chief lady-in-waiting, often an older, experienced noblewoman who might have made a similar journey herself in her youth, becomes a surrogate mother, a confidant, and a guide. She'll help you maintain your composure, coach you on what to expect, and try to shield you from the worst of the hardships. But even she cannot fully prepare you for what lies at the end of the road: a new court, a new family, and a new life where you will be an object of intense scrutiny and expectation. Historians still argue whether the primary emotion experienced by princesses on these journeys was overwhelming fear and dread, or if it was sometimes tempered by a sense of adventure, duty, or even ambition. For some, particularly those from smaller, less powerful families marrying into a major royal house, it might have represented an elevation in status, a chance to wield influence, however indirect. For others, it was simply a terrifying leap into the unknown, a sacrifice made on the altar of dynastic politics. The reality, as always, was likely a complex mix, unique to each individual princess and her circumstances. Finally, after what seems like an eternity, word comes that you are approaching your destination. The pace might quicken. There's a flurry of activity as everyone tries to look their best. Robes are shaken out, jewels polished, horses groomed. You're about to meet your future face to face. The gates of a new city, a new castle loom ahead, and as you pass beneath them, you know with absolute certainty that your old life is well and truly over. You're no longer just your father's daughter. You are now the promised bride, the future queen, a stranger in a strange land. The arrival at your new home, the court of your betrothed, is a spectacle of carefully orchestrated pomp and ceremony. You're no longer just a traveller weary from the road. You're a precious diplomatic package being formally delivered. Throngs of people line the streets, curious to catch a glimpse of their future queen. Banners fly, trumpets blare, and dignitaries in their finest attire greet your procession. It's overwhelming, a dizzying kaleidoscope of new faces, new sounds, and new smells. You, at the centre of it all, must maintain an air of serene dignity, despite the churning anxiety in your stomach and the exhaustion clinging to your bones. This is your first impression, and it matters immensely. You're escorted to the heart of the castle or palace, where your fiancé and his family await. This is the moment. You finally see him, perhaps for the first time, or the first time since you were both children at your betrothal. He might be a handsome young prince, eager and nervous himself, or a stern older man whose gaze makes you feel like an insect under a lens. His mother, the current queen, will be observing you with particular intensity. She was once in your shoes, and she knows what is expected of you. She may see you as a welcome partner, a potential threat to her own influence, or simply another young woman to be moulded. It's a high-stakes meet and greet, where every glance, every word, every subtle gesture is laden with meaning. You're basically on the medieval version of The Bachelorette, except there's only one contestant, and he's already got the rose and you have to say yes. The days leading up to the wedding ceremony are a whirlwind of preparations and public appearances. There will be feasting, jousting tournaments, and elaborate entertainments, all designed to celebrate the union and display the wealth and power of your new family. You're fitted for your wedding gown, a sumptuous creation of silk, velvet, and cloth of gold, perhaps embroidered with pearls and gemstones. It will be incredibly heavy, a physical manifestation of the weighty responsibilities you are about to assume. You will meet your new ladies-in-waiting, women of this court who will now be your constant companions, and whether you like it or not, your observers and reporters. Some may become genuine friends, others will be spies for various factions within the court. Learning to navigate these new relationships is crucial for your survival. Then comes the wedding day itself. A mainstream historical fact is that royal weddings were public affairs, not private romantic moments. The ceremony is likely held in a grand cathedral or the castle's main chapel, packed with nobles, clergy, and representatives from other kingdoms. You walk down the aisle, a solitary figure in your magnificent gown, towards the man who is now your husband. The vows are exchanged, often in Latin, the words of the sacrament binding you together, until death do us part. A vow taken very seriously, with divorce being virtually impossible and annulments incredibly difficult and politically messy to obtain. Rings are exchanged, blessings given, you're now officially married. But the public aspect of the day is far from over. After the ceremony and the ensuing celebratory feast, a lavish affair with multiple courses of exotic and expensive foods designed to impress and display status, comes one of the most daunting and peculiar rituals for a young royal bride, the public bedding ceremony. Yes, you read that right. Public bedding. While the consummation itself would usually be private, the lead-up was often a bizarrely communal event. After the feasting and dancing, you, the bride, would be escorted to the bedchamber by a procession of ladies, and your husband by a procession of men. There might be ribald jokes, singing, and a general air of boisterous expectation. The wedding bed itself, often a grand curtained affair, might be blessed by a bishop or priest. You would be undressed by your ladies, helped into a fine nightgown, and put into the bed. Your husband, similarly undressed by his male attendants, would then join you. The curtains would be drawn, and the guests would finally depart, leaving you alone with your new spouse, often a virtual stranger, to complete the marriage in the most intimate way possible. One can only imagine the terror, the awkwardness, the sheer humiliation for a young girl, often barely into her teens, to go through such an ordeal. Forget pre-wedding jitters. This is a whole other level of anxiety. Some historians suggest this was less fun and more a medieval version of ensuring all legalities were observed, like a really uncomfortable over-witnessed contract signing. The consummation was of vital political importance. An unconsummated marriage could, in theory, be annulled. Therefore proof, or at least a strong indication that the marriage had been physically completed, was often sought. The next morning the bedsheets might be inspected by trusted witnesses for evidence of virginity and consummation, a practice that, to modern sensibilities, is almost unimaginably intrusive and demeaning. A quirky and frankly horrifying tidbit is that sometimes, if the couple was very young, or the groom particularly inept or nervous, attendants might even remain in the room, or just outside the curtains offering encouragement or advice. It sounds like the worst kind of performance anxiety nightmare. It's a far cry from a romantic honeymoon. It's a state-sanctioned, publicly anticipated act of procreation. Historians still argue whether these bedding rituals were universally applied with the same degree of public involvement across all European courts and time periods within the Middle Ages, or if there was significant variation. Some accounts suggest a more symbolic presence of witnesses, while others detail a far more intrusive process. Regardless of the specifics, the underlying pressure for consummation and subsequent proof was immense. For you, the young bride, this night marks a profound and often traumatic transition. You're no longer a girl, no longer even just a wife. You're now, in the eyes of the court and the kingdom, a potential mother of future heirs. Your personal feelings, your fear, your dignity. These are secondary to the dynastic imperative. Once this ordeal is over, you might expect some peace, some privacy. But the scrutiny continues. Has the Queen conceived? Every month that passes without news of a pregnancy will increase the pressure, the whispers, the anxious glances from your husband and his counsellors. Your body is now a battleground for dynastic succession, and this first brutal night is merely the opening salvo. The unveiling of you as a bride to this new court is complete, and the bedding has, whether traumatic or merely awkward, sealed your fate. You're well and truly enmeshed in the machinery of royalty, a cog whose primary function is about to become terrifyingly clear. Sleep, if it comes, will be shallow, punctuated by the awareness that your most private life is now a matter of public concern and political consequence. Welcome to queenship. Don't forget to smile at breakfast. The morning after the eventful wedding night, you awaken in a bed that still feels alien, in a room filled with unfamiliar shadows and sounds. The heavy scent of incense from the previous night's blessing might still linger, mingling with the beeswax polish on the dark, carved furniture. Even if your husband is kind, or at least not actively cruel, an undeniable sense of strangeness pervades everything. You are now a wife, a queen-in-waiting, or perhaps already a queen consort, but you are also, profoundly, a stranger in a strange court. This isn't like being the new kid at school where you can just try to find the friendly faces at lunch. This is a high-stakes game of social survival, where the rules are unwritten and the players have been at it for years. Your ladies-in-waiting, a mix of those who accompanied you from your homeland and those newly assigned from your husband's court, will attend you. The ones from home are your only link to the familiar, but even they must be cautious, lest they be seen as fostering foreign influence or isolating you. The new ladies are a puzzle. Are they genuinely welcoming, or are their smiles masks for curiosity, suspicion, or even ambition? They will be your constant companions, dressing you, accompanying you to mass, sitting with you during the long hours of needlework or formal audiences. They are your gatekeepers and your shadows. Every word you speak, every preference you express, every friendship you attempt to cultivate will be noted, discussed, and perhaps reported to higher authorities, your mother-in-law, the king's councillors, or even the king himself. Privacy, as you once knew it, is a luxury you can no longer afford. The court itself is a labyrinth of intricate relationships, unspoken rivalries, and deeply entrenched factions. There are the old, established noble families who have served the crown for generations, wary of any newcomer who might upset the delicate balance of power. There are ambitious younger nobles, seeking favour and advancement. There are influential clergy, whose spiritual authority often translates into significant political clout. And then there's your husband's family, his mother, the Dowager Queen, who may be reluctant to relinquish her own position and influence, his siblings, who might see you as a competitor for affection or resources, his more distant relatives, all with their own agendas. It's a viper's nest, and you've been dropped right into the middle of it, probably wearing very expensive but highly flammable silks. Your foreignness is both an asset and a liability. You represent an alliance, a connection to another powerful realm, but you also represent the unknown, the other. Your accent, your customs, even the style of your clothing if it differs from the local fashion, will set you apart. Some may find it exotic and charming. Others will see it as a sign that you don't belong, that you can't be fully trusted. Xenophobia, that lovely human trait, is alive and well in medieval courts. Whispers will follow you down corridors. The foreign queen, her strange ways. Does she truly have our kingdom's interest at heart? You'll need the diplomatic skills of a seasoned ambassador and the patience of a saint, all while trying to figure out which fork to use at dinner. Learning the language, if it's different, is paramount. Until you are fluent, you are reliant on translators, which immediately puts you at a disadvantage, unable to catch the nuances, the subtext, the quick asides that often carry the real meaning in courtly conversations. Even if you speak the language, understanding the local idioms, the in-jokes, the historical references that pepper courtly discourse, takes time and careful observation. Making a linguistic gaffe could be merely embarrassing, or it could be politically disastrous if your words are misinterpreted deliberately or otherwise. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval courts were highly ritualized environments, with complex rules of precedence and etiquette. Who enters a room first? Who sits where at the high table? Who is entitled to speak to whom, and in what manner? These are not trivial details. They are visible manifestations of the social and political hierarchy. A misstep can cause offence, signal disrespect, or reveal your ignorance of crucial power dynamics. You're constantly on display, constantly being judged. Your education in deportment back home was just the preliminary course. Now you're in the advanced class, and the final exam could involve keeping your head, literally. You must quickly learn who your allies are and who might be working against you. This requires sharp observation, discretion, and a good ear for gossip, though you must be careful not to become a gossip yourself, or to appear to favour one faction over another too obviously, especially in the early days. Your primary loyalty, of course, must be to your husband and his kingdom. Any perceived lingering attachment to your homeland beyond what is diplomatically appropriate could be twisted into accusations of divided loyalties, or even treason. This can be incredibly painful if your home country and your new one find themselves on opposing sides of a conflict. Talk about awkward holiday dinners. A quirky tidbit is the existence of mirror princes or shadow courts in some larger kingdoms. These weren't official, but represented factions who might support an alternative heir or a different political agenda. A new queen would need to be acutely aware of such undercurrents, as aligning with the wrong group, even unintentionally, could be perilous. It's like navigating a minefield where the mines are wearing ermine and whispering about your questionable taste in hats. Historians still argue about the degree of agency a new queen could exercise in shaping her own position within a foreign court. Was she entirely at the mercy of established power structures, and her husband's goodwill, or could a clever, politically astute woman carve out a significant sphere of influence for herself relatively quickly? The answer likely depends on a multitude of factors. Her personality, the strength of her own family connections, the political stability of her new kingdom, and the character of her husband. Some queens faded into the background, fulfilling their dynastic duties quietly. Others became formidable players in their own right. Your early days, weeks and months are a period of intense learning and adaptation. You're observing, listening, trying to understand the complex tapestry of your new life. You're likely homesick, lonely, and perhaps a little scared, but you must project an image of confidence, grace, and unwavering loyalty. Every smile must be measured, every word chosen with care. The whispers might not always be hostile. There will be curiosity, perhaps even admiration. But they are always there, a constant reminder that you are the stranger, the outsider, slowly, carefully trying to find your place in this glittering, treacherous new world. And all the while, the primary expectation, the one that trumps all others, hangs over you. The need to produce an heir. The initial whirlwind of your arrival, wedding, and introduction to the new court eventually settles into a more established, if no less demanding, routine. But beneath the surface of daily prayers, formal meals, and endless needlework, one silent, screaming pressure begins to dominate your existence. The absolute non-negotiable necessity of producing a male heir. This isn't just a gentle family expectation, like your in-laws hoping for grandkids. This is a matter of state, the bedrock upon which the security and continuity of the dynasty, and indeed the kingdom, rests. Your womb has become the most valuable and the most scrutinized piece of territory in the realm. From the moment your marriage was consummated, and remember that charming public bedding ritual, the countdown began. Every month that passes without news of a pregnancy is a month of mounting anxiety, not just for you, but for your husband, his counsellors, and anyone with a stake in the succession. Whispers in the corridors, which previously focused on your foreignness or your deportment, now shift to your fertility. Is she barren? Has the king displeased God, that his line is not blessed? Perhaps the alliance was ill-fated. It's a heavy burden, a constant invisible weight on your shoulders. You start to dread the arrival of your monthly courses, each one a fresh disappointment, a renewed source of stress and pointed questions. Your husband, who might otherwise be a kind or at least indifferent companion, will likely become increasingly preoccupied with your reproductive status. His own legitimacy and power are intrinsically linked to his ability to father a legitimate heir. If you fail to conceive, or if you only produce daughters, it can be seen as his failure too, or worse, a sign of divine displeasure. This can strain even the most amicable royal marriages. The pressure on him is immense, and that pressure inevitably transfers to you. It's not exactly conducive to a romantic atmosphere when every encounter is freighted with dynastic expectation. Forget mood lighting. You're operating under the harsh glare of, is she pregnant yet? The court physicians, whose medical knowledge is a fascinating and often terrifying blend of classical theory, herbalism, and outright superstition, will likely be consulted. You'll be subjected to all manner of examinations and prescribed various remedies, some merely unpleasant, others potentially harmful. They might advise specific diets, perhaps foods thought to promote fertility, like eggs, nuts, or certain herbs. A mainstream historical fact is that medieval medical theory, largely based on the Hippocratic and Galenic systems of humours, blood, phlegm, yellow bile, black bile, often attributed infertility to an imbalance of these humours in either partner. Therefore, treatments would aim to rebalance them, perhaps through bloodletting, yes, really, purges, or specific dietary restrictions. It's a wonder anyone survived the cures, let alone conceived. Prayers and religious offerings will intensify. You'll make pilgrimages to the shrines of saints known for their intercession in matters of fertility, like St. Anne, the mother of the Virgin Mary, or St. Gerard Majella, though his patronage for expectant mothers was more prominent later. The general principle of seeking saintly help was well established. Special masses will be said. You might be encouraged to wear relics or blessed amulets. The Church plays a significant role here, framing childbearing as a divine blessing and infertility as a potential sign of sin or a test of faith. This adds a spiritual and psychological dimension to the already immense political pressure. It's not just that you need will a baby for the kingdom. God wants you to have a baby. No pressure. If months turn into years without a pregnancy, or if you only bear daughters, the situation can become critical. The stability of the kingdom can be threatened. Rival claimants to the throne might begin to circle, sensing weakness. Your husband might start to consider options. While divorce as we know it was not really a thing, annulments could sometimes be obtained, especially if a case could be made for non-consummation, difficult if you've been married for years, or if the couple were found to be related within the prohibited degrees of kinship, a surprisingly common get-out clause, given how interconnected European royal families were. Oh dear, it turns out we're third cousins once removed. Who knew? Finding a pretext to set aside a barren queen and marry a younger, hopefully more fertile, one was a grim reality for some royal women. Your entire position, your security, even your life, could depend on your ability to conceive, and specifically to conceive a son, and why the intense focus on a male heir. In most medieval European kingdoms, Salic law or similar succession principles were in effect, or at least strongly favoured, preventing women from inheriting the throne in their own right, or placing them far down the line of succession after all possible male relatives. A daughter might be a valuable marriage pawn, as we've discussed, but she couldn't usually wear the crown herself or lead armies into battle. A son represented a direct, unambiguous continuation of the male line, a future king to secure the dynasty. Producing daughter after daughter, while perhaps endearing you to your husband on a personal level, would do little to alleviate the political pressure. You'd just be assembling a very well-bred collection of future diplomatic bargaining chips. A quirky and somewhat sad tidbit is the array of folk remedies and superstitious practices women might resort to in their desperation to conceive. These could range from drinking specific concoctions of herbs, some of which might have been genuinely effective, others downright dangerous, wearing certain types of stones or charms, or even performing bizarre rituals under a full moon. Imagine a queen laden with jewels and silks by day, secretly consulting with a village wise woman by night, desperate for any hope. Historians still argue about the emotional toll this relentless pressure to produce an heir took on royal women and how it affected their relationships with their husbands and their own sense of self-worth. Was it simply an accepted part of their duty, a burden borne with stoic resignation? Or did it lead to profound personal suffering, anxiety and depression? The historical record, mostly written by men, often focuses on the dynastic implications rather than the personal anguish of the women involved. But it's hard to imagine that this constant high-stakes scrutiny of their most intimate bodily functions didn't have a deep and lasting impact. So, you live under this constant shadow, this unspoken, or often very loudly spoken, demand. Your body is a vessel, your fertility a matter of national security. Every social interaction, every political calculation is underpinned by this one fundamental question. Will she provide an heir? It's a brutal, relentless pressure that defines your existence as a royal woman in medieval times, and if you do, finally conceive, the relief is immense, but it's quickly replaced by a new set of anxieties, carrying the pregnancy to term in a world fraught with medical risks. The womb's great burden doesn't end with conception, it merely enters a new, equally perilous phase. The moment you confirm you are pregnant, perhaps through missed monthly courses, a subtle thickening of your waist, or the dreaded onset of morning sickness, for which the medieval cure was probably something like eat a dry crust and pray harder, a wave of relief, quickly followed by a fresh tide of anxiety, washes over not just you, but the entire court. The relentless pressure to conceive is momentarily lifted, replaced by the equally intense pressure to carry this precious cargo safely to term and, most importantly, to survive the delivery. Childbirth in medieval times, even for a queen surrounded by the best, such as it was, medical care available, was a life-threatening ordeal. It was, quite literally, a brush with death for both you and your unborn child. Your daily routine will change. You might be excused from some of the more strenuous courtly duties, though you'll still be expected to maintain a visible presence, a symbol of the dynasty's hopeful future. Your diet will be scrutinised even more closely, with certain foods encouraged, often bland, easily digestible items, and others forbidden. based on the prevailing humoral theories about what was best for a developing fetus and the mother's delicate condition. Gentle exercise, like walking in the castle gardens, might be permitted, but anything too vigorous is out. You are, in essence, a precious vessel, and everyone is terrified of it breaking. As your pregnancy progresses, the preparations for the birth will begin in earnest. A special birthing chamber will be prepared, often the same one where you were born, or one deemed particularly auspicious. A mainstream historical fact is that these chambers were typically kept warm, sometimes overly so, with fires blazing and windows sealed, in the belief that cold and draughts were dangerous for both mother and newborn. The air would become thick and stuffy, probably not ideal by modern standards, but considered essential for safety. Tapestries might be hung, not just for warmth and decoration, but sometimes depicting scenes of successful births, or featuring patron saints of childbirth, like St. Margaret of Antioch, who, according to legend, emerged unharmed from the belly of a dragon, a rather vivid metaphor for surviving childbirth. It's like decorating the delivery room with posters of action heroes, hoping for a similar triumphant outcome. As your time draws near, a team of women will assemble. The midwife, almost certainly an experienced older woman who has attended countless births, will be the primary figure. She relies on empirical knowledge passed down through generations, her skills honed by practice rather than formal medical training in the male-dominated universities. Your mother, if she's still alive and present, your mother-in-law, and your closest ladies-in-waiting will form your support team, offering prayers, encouragement, and perhaps dubious advice. Men, including physicians, unless a dire emergency arose, and even then their involvement was controversial and often resisted, were strictly excluded from the birthing chamber. This was women's sacred space, their domain of suffering and creation. When labour begins, it is a descent into a world of pain, unlike anything you could have imagined. There are no epidurals, no effective painkillers beyond perhaps some herbal concoctions that might take the edge off slightly, or more likely just make you drowsy. You might be encouraged to walk around in the early stages to lean on your attendants, or to adopt various positions believed to aid delivery, kneeling, squatting, or using a birthing stool, a chair with an open seat designed for this very purpose. The pain is relentless, overwhelming. Your attendants will pray, chant, wipe your brow, and offer sips of water or fortified wine. Relics of saints might be placed on your belly or clutched in your hands. The entire process could last for hours, even days, especially for a first birth. It's an endurance test of the most brutal kind. The risks are terrifyingly high. Maternal mortality rates were staggering. Infection, puerperal fever, or childbed fever was a common and often fatal complication in the days before germ theory and antibiotics. Postpartum hemorrhage, excessive bleeding after birth, could quickly lead to death. Obstructed labour, where the baby is unable to pass through the birth canal, could be a death sentence for both mother and child. Surgical interventions like a caesarean section were almost unheard of on a living mother. They were typically a last resort to save the baby if the mother had already died or was clearly dying. If you think modern hospital birth plans are stressful, imagine facing this with little more than hope and a midwife who learned her trade from her grandmother. And if the baby is in a difficult position, say breech, feet or bottom first, the midwife's skill is paramount. She will attempt to manually turn the baby, a painful and risky procedure for both of you. If the labour stalls, she might use herbal stimulants or massage, but her options are limited. The fear in the room would be palpable, the prayers growing more fervent as your strength wanes and the life within you struggles to emerge. A quirky and rather grim tidbit is the girdle of Our Lady, a relic that was sometimes loaned out from religious houses to royal and noble women in labour. These were sashes or belts believed to have been touched or worn by the Virgin Mary, and wearing them during childbirth was thought to ease pain and ensure a safe delivery. Desperate times called for desperate and often expensive measures. Whether it actually helped or just provided a psychological boost is debatable, but it shows the deep intertwining of faith and fear surrounding childbirth. Historians still argue about the exact maternal mortality rates in the medieval period, particularly for royalty, as records can be incomplete or biased. While queens had access to more resources, better food, and theoretically better care than peasant women, they were not immune to the fundamental dangers of childbirth. Some argue that the very interventions available to them, or the heightened stress of their public position, might have even, paradoxically, increased certain risks. If, by the grace of God and the skill of your midwife, you survive the delivery and a living child is born, the relief in the chamber is immense, almost ecstatic. The first cry of the newborn cuts through the exhaustion and fear. The sex of the child is announced, and if it's a boy, the joy is amplified tenfold. You have done your duty. You have faced death and emerged victorious with the future of the dynasty in your arms. But the danger is not yet over. The days and weeks following childbirth, the postpartum period, are still perilous. Rest, as much as is possible in a busy court, is crucial for recovery, but infection can still set in. And the emotional toll, even with a successful birth, can be significant. Postpartum depression wasn't a recognised medical condition, but it undoubtedly existed, likely dismissed as melancholy or spiritual weakness. You have walked through the valley of the shadow of childbirth, a terrifying rite of passage that every medieval mother, from peasant to queen, had to endure if she chose to bear children. For you, as a royal woman, the stakes were just higher, the audience larger, and the consequences of failure more profound. Each successful birth is a triumph, but the shadow of that danger will loom over every subsequent pregnancy. You've survived the ordeal of childbirth, perhaps multiple times. You've brought forth heirs, and maybe some spares, securing the line of succession and fulfilling your most critical dynastic duty. You might imagine that now, finally, you'll get to experience the joys of motherhood, bonding with your infants, watching them grow. But the reality for a medieval royal mother is often quite different. Your children, especially the all-important male heir, are frequently seen less as beloved family members and more as dynastic assets. Their upbringing too important to be left solely to a mother's affection. It's less baby shark and more baby strategic advantage. Almost as soon as your newborn is cleaned and swaddled, and certainly after the immediate postpartum period, the royal nursery system kicks in, a well-oiled machine designed to raise future rulers or valuable marriage prospects. Remember your own infancy, handed off to a wet nurse. The same fate likely awaits your own babies. A mainstream historical fact is that the use of wet nurses was standard practice in royal and noble households throughout the Middle Ages. As we touched upon earlier, breastfeeding was believed to prevent a woman from conceiving again quickly, and with the pressure to produce multiple heirs, given the high child mortality rates, queens were expected to become pregnant again as soon as possible after a birth. Furthermore, the physical demands of breastfeeding were seen as unbefitting a queen's dignity and her ceremonial duties. It was also believed, as mentioned, that the qualities of the wet nurse could be transmitted through her milk, so great care was taken in selecting a healthy, placid and morally upright woman for this crucial role. So, your tiny infant, the one you risked your life to bring into the world, is handed over to another woman's care for their primary nourishment. You might visit the nursery, of course. You might hold your baby, coo at them, feel that fierce rush of maternal love. But the day-to-day, hour-to-hour care, the feeding, the changing, the soothing of cries in the dead of night is largely undertaken by others. This can create a sense of distance, an emotional remove, whether you desire it or not. It's a practical arrangement, dictated by dynastic necessity and social custom, but it can be a painful one for a mother. As your children grow from infants into toddlers and young children, their world remains largely separate from yours. They will have their own household within the royal household, headed by a governess for daughters, or a governor tutor for sons. These individuals are chosen with immense care, often high-ranking nobles or learned churchmen, tasked with the children's education, moral upbringing and training in etiquette and duty. You, as the Queen, would certainly have input into these appointments and would oversee their progress, but you're not their primary caregiver or educator. You're more like the CEO of Royal Offspring Inc., delegating the operational tasks. Your sons, from a very early age, will be groomed for kingship or other positions of power. They'll be taught to ride, to handle weapons, to understand military strategy and statecraft. Their tutors will instruct them in history, law, and perhaps languages. Their lives are geared towards leadership and warfare. Your daughters, like you before them, will be educated in piety, domestic arts, languages, and the graces necessary to become suitable brides for other royal houses. Their value lies in their future marriage alliances. It's a highly gendered upbringing, preparing each child for their predetermined role in the dynastic game. This separation doesn't necessarily mean a lack of love or affection. Many royal mothers undoubtedly cherish their children deeply. Letters and contemporary accounts sometimes reveal tender maternal feelings, but the expression of that love and the nature of the mother-child relationship was shaped by the constraints of their position. You might see your children at specific times of the day, perhaps for a formal presentation or a supervised play session. But the intimate, everyday interactions that forge strong bonds in modern families are often missing. They are, first and foremost, the king's children, the kingdom's heirs, and their upbringing reflects that status. Child mortality rates in the medieval period were appallingly high, even for the privileged. Diseases that are now easily preventable or treatable, measles, smallpox, dysentery, even a common fever, could sweep through a nursery and decimate a generation of royal children. A sobering, quirky tidbit is the practice of votive offerings for sick children, where parents would pledge a wax model of the afflicted child, or even their weight in wax or silver, to a particular saint's shrine in hopes of a cure. Imagine the desperation of a mother, watching her child suffer. Her only recourse these acts of faith and expensive offerings. The grief of losing a child, an experience many medieval royal women endured multiple times, must have been profound, compounded by the dynastic implications of such a loss. Historians still argue about the typical emotional closeness between medieval royal mothers and their children, given these structured and often separated living arrangements. Were these relationships inherently more formal and distant, or did maternal affection find ways to flourish, despite the societal norms? It's difficult to generalize, as individual personalities and specific family dynamics would have varied greatly. Some queens were known to be deeply involved in their children's lives, taking a keen interest in their education and well-being, while others seem to have maintained a more formal distance, entrusting their care almost entirely to the appointed staff. Your children are also potential rivals or pawns in courtly power struggles. A favoured son might be seen as a threat by his ambitious uncles or older half-siblings if they exist. Your daughters, once they reach marriageable age, become critical pieces in your husband's and your diplomatic strategies. You might find yourself having to send a beloved daughter off to a foreign land just as you were sent, knowing the hardships and loneliness she will face. The cycle continues, so while the birth of an heir, especially a son, brings immense relief and a temporary reprieve from the most intense pressures, your role as a mother is complex and often bittersweet. You are the source of the next generation, but you're not always its primary nurturer. Your children are dynastic assets, their lives and futures shaped by the needs of the crown. You love them, you worry for them, you pray for them, but they are, in a very real sense, not entirely yours. They belong to the kingdom, to the future, their small hands already destined to hold sceptres, will be given in marriage for the good of the realm. You've successfully navigated the treacherous waters of childbirth and provided the requisite heirs, and hopefully a few spares just in case. Your children are being meticulously groomed in the royal nursery complex, their futures already mapped out by dynastic necessity. So, what now for you, the Queen? Do you get to kick back with a goblet of Hippocras and enjoy a well-earned rest? Not quite. Your role now largely solidifies into that of a consort, a supportive partner to your husband, the king. But the question always lingers: how much real power can you wield? Can you be more than just a beautiful, pious and fertile figurehead? As Queen Consort, your primary official role is to be a model of virtue, piety and wifely devotion. You're expected to set the moral tone for the court, to be a patron of religious institutions, and to manage your own extensive household with grace and efficiency. Your household is a significant establishment in itself, with its own budget, staff and sphere of influence. Managing it effectively, overseeing the ladies-in-waiting, the servants, the finances, the supplies, is a considerable administrative task and a display of your competence. Think of it as running a medium-sized, very dramatic corporation, where a budget miscalculation could lead to whispers of incompetence rather than just a stern email from accounting. You will accompany your husband on ceremonial occasions, adding to the splendour and dignity of the crown. Your presence at state banquets, religious festivals, and the reception of foreign ambassadors is essential. You are, in many ways, the softer, more approachable face of the monarchy. While the king projects power and authority, you can embody compassion, charity, and grace. This can be a powerful tool in itself, winning the affection and loyalty of the people, which in turn strengthens your husband's rule. Many successful queens were renowned for their charitable works, distributing alms to the poor, founding hospitals or religious houses, and interceding on behalf of the unfortunate. This wasn't just altruism, it was also good politics, building a reservoir of popular goodwill. A mainstream historical fact is that queens often acted as intercessors. People who couldn't get access to the king, or who feared his wrath, might appeal to the queen to plead their case. She could, if she chose and if her husband was receptive, use her influence to advocate for individuals, to seek pardons, or to mediate disputes. This role as a compassionate intermediary could be a significant, if informal, source of power. However, it was a delicate balancing act. You had to choose your causes wisely, and know when to press and when to defer to your husband's judgment. Push too hard or for the wrong thing, and you could undermine your own influence or anger the king. Can you be a political advisor? This is where things get tricky. Officially, a queen consort had no formal political power. She didn't sit on the king's council or command armies. However, behind the scenes, the reality could be very different. A shrewd and intelligent queen, who had earned her husband's trust and respect, could become his closest confidant and most trusted advisor. She might discuss matters of state with him in private, offer her insights, and influence his decisions. This was especially true if she was well educated, politically astute, and had a good understanding of the personalities and factions within the court and in neighbouring kingdoms, perhaps even her own homeland if relations were good. Your pillow talk might be less about sweet nothings and more about the potential repercussions of a new trade tariff with Flanders. However, this kind of influence was entirely dependent on the personal relationship between the king and queen, and on the king's own character. Some kings valued their wives' opinions and actively sought their counsel. Others preferred their queens to remain firmly in the domestic sphere, seen and not heard when it came to politics. And even if a king did listen to his wife, she had to be careful. Overtly meddling in politics, or being perceived as trying to usurp the king's authority, was incredibly dangerous. Accusations of undue influence could be a powerful weapon used by her enemies at court. What about ruling in your own right, as a crowned queen regnant? This was exceptionally rare in most parts of medieval Europe. Salic law, prevalent in France and some other kingdoms, explicitly barred women from inheriting the throne. In other places, like England or Castile, female succession was possible, but usually only in the absence of direct male heirs, and it was often contested. A woman who did inherit the throne in her own right faced immense challenges in establishing her authority in a male-dominated world. She would need to be exceptionally strong, politically savvy, and often ruthless to survive and rule effectively. Think of figures like Isabella I of Castile, or, much later, Elizabeth I of England. They were the exceptions that proved the rule, towering personalities who overcame enormous obstacles. For most royal women, the crown they wore was a consort's crown, its brilliance derived from their husbands. A more common, though still significant path to power for a queen was to act as regent if her husband was absent, perhaps on crusade or campaigning abroad, or if her son inherited the throne as a minor. A quirky tidbit is that sometimes the terms of a regency were fiercely negotiated and legally documented before a king went on a long journey, specifying the queen's powers and limitations. As regent, a queen could wield considerable, albeit temporary, authority. She would govern in her husband's or son's name, making decisions, issuing edicts, and managing the affairs of the kingdom. This required immense skill, as she would face scrutiny and potential opposition from powerful nobles who might resent being ruled by a woman. Many queens rose to this challenge magnificently, proving themselves capable and effective rulers. Eleanor of Aquitaine, for instance, famously governed her vast domains, and even accompanied her first husband on crusade. Historians still argue about the true extent of soft power wielded by medieval queens consort. Was their influence primarily limited to domestic matters and charitable works, with only occasional forays into the political realm, or did many queens consistently exert a more subtle but pervasive influence over their husbands and, through them, over the affairs of state? The very nature of this informal influence makes it difficult to trace in historical records which tend to focus on official acts and male rulers. So, your life as a queen consort is a complex tapestry of ceremonial duties, household management, charitable activities, and the constant subtle negotiation of influence. You're a symbol, an intercessor, a manager, and perhaps, if you are skilled and your husband is willing, a trusted advisor. You might not wear the crown in your own right, but you are undeniably at the centre of power, even if your own power is often reflected rather than direct. The gilded cage has many responsibilities, and sometimes, just sometimes, it offers a glimpse of real authority. So, you're a queen. You have the jewels, the silks, the extensive household, and that undeniable aura of royalty. Sounds pretty glamorous, right? But let's peel back the ermine and look at the daily reality. For many royal women, life was less a fairy tale and more a beautifully decorated, meticulously managed, and incredibly restrictive routine. A gilded cage, if you will. Freedom, as you or I might understand it, is a concept that simply doesn't apply in the same way. Your every moment is scheduled, your every action observed, your every choice constrained by duty, expectation, and the ever-present need to maintain your immaculate reputation. Your day begins early, often before dawn, with private prayers in your oratory, or a visit to the castle chapel for an early mass. Piety, remember, is non-negotiable. It's the bedrock of your public image, and, for many queens, a genuine source of personal solace in a life that offers few other private comforts. After your devotions, you're attended by your ladies-in-waiting, who help you with the elaborate process of dressing. This isn't a quick slip-on-a-dress-and-run affair. Medieval royal attire is complex, layered, and often heavy, designed to display status and wealth. There are chemises, kirtles, surcoats, gowns, veils, headdresses, each element carefully chosen and meticulously arranged. Your hair, a symbol of your femininity, will be elaborately dressed, often plaited and coiled, or covered by intricate headwear, as befits a married woman of high station. Just getting ready for the day is a performance in itself, requiring patience and the assistance of several attendants. You probably can't even tie your own shoes, or what passed for them, without help. Once dressed and presentable, your day unfolds according to a fairly rigid schedule. More religious services will follow, perhaps a high mass with the king and the entire court in attendance. Meals are formal, public affairs, especially if you are dining in the Great Hall. You sit at the high table, a focal point of attention, your every bite and sip observed. The food, while often lavish and featuring expensive imported spices, might not always be to your personal taste, but you eat what is served, maintaining your regal composure. Conversation is polite, formal, and often politically charged, even if it sounds like idle chatter about the weather or the latest hunt. Remember those whispers we talked about? They're still there. Much of your time will be spent in the Queen's apartments, the solar or bower, which serves as your private domain, though private is a relative term when you're constantly surrounded by your ladies. Here, the primary activity, day in and day out, is needlework. As we discussed in your early education, this is more than a hobby. You and your ladies will work on vast tapestries, intricate embroideries for clerical vestments, banners for knights, or delicate personal items. A mainstream historical fact is that these collective embroidery projects by queens and their ladies often had significant cultural and political meaning, depicting historical events, religious scenes, or family lineage, and serving as powerful visual statements of identity and power. The Bayeux Tapestry, while its exact origins are debated, is a prime example of the kind of monumental narrative needlework that women produced. So, while you might be thinking, more sewing. Really? It's actually high-stakes crafting. Beyond needlework, you might listen to musicians or perhaps play an instrument yourself if that was part of your education. Minstrels or troubadours might entertain the court with songs and stories. You might have books read aloud, devotional texts, chivalric romances, carefully vetted of course, or perhaps histories. If you are literate, you might spend some time reading yourself, or dictating letters to your chaplain or clerk, correspondence with your family in your homeland, always carefully worded, instructions for your household, or perhaps charitable requests. There are also ceremonial duties. You might grant audiences to petitioners seeking your intercession, receive visiting dignitaries alongside your husband, or participate in religious processions and festivals. If your husband is away, your responsibilities might increase, as you act as a focal point of stability and authority in his absence. even a simple walk in the castle gardens is likely to be a formal affair, accompanied by your ladies, a visible display of the Queen taking her leisure. Spontaneous trips to the medieval equivalent of a mall? Not happening. Physical activity is limited. While noblewomen did hunt on occasion, usually a more genteel form of hawking rather than boar hunting, and riding was a necessary skill, strenuous exercise was generally not considered appropriate for a queen, especially if she was of childbearing age or actually pregnant. Your life is largely sedentary, confined within the castle walls or the immediate vicinity. The world outside is something you glimpse from a window or experience in carefully managed excursions, and always you're under surveillance. Your ladies-in-waiting are not just companions, they are guardians of your reputation, and, by extension, the honour of the crown. Your confessor, the priest who hears your sins, is another person who knows your innermost thoughts, and while the seal of the confessional is sacrosanct, the clergy are also deeply enmeshed in the power structures of the court. There is very little that you can do or say that doesn't have the potential to be reported, misinterpreted, or used against you. It's like living in a reality TV show, but with much higher stakes and worse plumbing. A quirky and rather sad detail reflecting the lack of personal freedom is the Queen's menagerie. Some queens kept collections of exotic animals, monkeys, parrots, even larger beasts if space and resources allowed. These creatures, gifts from foreign rulers or symbols of wealth, were themselves caged, perhaps offering a strange parallel to the Queen's own constrained existence. They were a source of amusement and wonder, but also a constant reminder of a wider world beyond the castle walls, a world largely inaccessible to her. Historians still argue about the level of personal autonomy queens could realistically achieve within these constraints. Did the constant surveillance and rigid routine crush their spirits? Or did they find ways to carve out spaces for personal expression and agency, perhaps through their patronage, their private devotions, or their informal influence? Some undoubtedly found contentment and purpose within their prescribed roles. Others may have chafed bitterly against the limitations of their gilded cage. Your life is one of immense privilege, certainly compared to the vast majority of the population. You are sheltered from the harshest realities of medieval existence. You have food, warmth, and luxurious surroundings. But this privilege comes at the price of personal freedom, privacy, and often the ability to make your own choices. Your days are a predictable cycle of prayer, ceremony, and carefully managed leisure, all lived out in the public eye under the constant weight of expectation. It is a life of routine, repetition, and relentless observation, where even your moments of quiet contemplation are likely shared. Living within that gilded cage, with its routines and constant surveillance, also meant contending with the less glamorous realities of medieval life, particularly when it came to health and hygiene. Despite the silks and jewels, you're still living in an era with a very different understanding of cleanliness and medicine than we have today. Forget your antibacterial hand sanitizer and your modern pharmacopoeia. You're in a world where a simple infection could be a death sentence, and the cures were often as frightening as the diseases. Personal hygiene, even for royalty, was a mixed bag. While the wealthy certainly bathed more often than the peasantry, a daily full-body bath was not necessarily the norm. Baths were often elaborate affairs, requiring servants to haul and heat water and fill large wooden tubs. These might be scented with herbs or flower petals, a pleasant touch, but the soap, if available, would be harsh and lye-based. You might bathe once a week, or perhaps more frequently if it was a special occasion, or if you were feeling particularly grimy after a long journey. However, the general understanding of germ theory was non-existent, so while you might be relatively clean, the environment around you might not be. Remember the general lack of sanitation on the road. Castle life wasn't always a huge step up. Castles, for all their romantic imagery, could be draughty, damp, and surprisingly smelly. Rushes or straw were often strewn on the floors to absorb spills and provide some insulation, but these also harboured dirt, food scraps, and pests. Chamber pots were the primary toilet facility, emptied by servants, hopefully far from your apartments. Latrines, or garderobes, were often built into the castle walls, emptying directly into a moat or a pit below. Not exactly a fragrant feature, especially in summer. While your royal chambers would be kept cleaner than most, the overall environment was far from sterile. you're basically living in a very grand, very old building with plumbing that would make a modern health inspector weep. Common ailments that we now treat with a quick trip to the pharmacy were serious concerns. Colds, flu, digestive upsets. These could linger and weaken you, making you susceptible to more dangerous illnesses. Dental hygiene was rudimentary. People cleaned their teeth with twigs or cloth, and perhaps used abrasive powders made from herbs or crushed bone. Tooth decay, gum disease and toothaches were rampant, and the only cure for a problematic tooth was extraction, performed without anaesthetic by a barber surgeon using terrifying-looking implements. You'd probably rather endure the toothache, frankly. When you did fall ill, the medical care available was based on theories that seem utterly bizarre to us now. A mainstream historical fact is the dominance of humoral theory, as we've touched on, which posited that illness resulted from an imbalance of the four bodily humours: blood, phlegm, yellow bile, and black bile. The goal of treatment was to restore this balance. This led to practices like bloodletting, where a physician or surgeon would open a vein and drain a quantity of blood, believing it would remove the excess humour causing the illness. This could be done by venesection, cutting a vein, or by applying leeches. Given that blood loss weakens the body, it's debatable how often this actually helped, and it could certainly be harmful. It's like trying to fix your car by randomly draining fluids. Other common treatments included purges and emetics, to induce vomiting or diarrhoea, again to expel supposed bad humours. Herbal remedies were widely used, and some undoubtedly had genuine medicinal properties. Willow bark, for example, contains salicin, a precursor to aspirin. However, many herbal concoctions were based on folklore or the doctrine of signatures, the idea that a plant's appearance indicated what it could cure, so a heart-shaped leaf for heart problems. It was a hit-and-miss affair, with no quality control. Physicians, often learned churchmen who had studied ancient Greek and Roman medical texts, which were themselves a mixed bag of wisdom and error, would diagnose illnesses by examining urine, its colour, smell and even taste. Yes, uroscopy was a key diagnostic tool, checking the pulse and observing the patient's overall condition. Their treatments were often accompanied by prayers and astrological considerations, as the movements of the planets were believed to influence health. If your physician starts talking about Saturn being in the wrong house as the cause of your sniffles, you know you're in for a medieval medical adventure. A quirky and frankly stomach-churning tidbit from medieval medicine is the use of mummy powder, or mummia. This was a substance made from ground-up ancient Egyptian mummies, or sometimes less authentically more recently deceased individuals, which was believed to have potent healing properties and was prescribed for a wide range of ailments, from headaches to internal injuries. It was incredibly expensive and highly sought after. Imagine your royal physician solemnly offering you a spoonful of powdered pharaoh for your ague. No, thank you. I'll take my chances with the ague. Surgical procedures were incredibly risky due to the lack of anaesthesia and understanding of infection. Surgeons were often barber surgeons who combined hair cutting and shaving with more invasive procedures like setting bones, amputating limbs, a last resort with horrific mortality rates, and lancing boils. Infection was almost inevitable after any significant surgical intervention. Historians still argue about the overall effectiveness of medieval medical care for the elite. Did access to physicians and expensive remedies actually improve health outcomes for royalty, or were they sometimes subjected to more aggressive and potentially harmful treatments than the common folk who relied on simpler folk remedies and prayers? While the rich had more options, those options weren't always better, and could sometimes be worse. So, as a royal woman, you are living in an environment where a simple cut could become infected and life-threatening, where childbirth is a perilous journey, where fevers can rage unchecked by effective medicine, where the best medical minds of the age might prescribe treatments that seem designed to make you sicker. You maintain your regal poise, you manage your household, you fulfill your dynastic duties, but always in the background is the awareness of your physical vulnerability, and the often bizarre and ineffective nature of the cures available should illness strike. It adds another layer of precariousness to an already challenging existence. Keep that hand-stitched handkerchief close, you're going to need it. Beyond the daily grind of courtly duties and the ever-present threat of medieval maladies, there's another, more subtle pressure you face as a royal woman, the relentless pursuit of beauty. According to the often bizarre and demanding standards of the time, your appearance isn't just a personal matter, It's a reflection of your status, your virtue, and even the health and prestige of your lineage. Looking the part of a beautiful, serene queen is practically in the job description, and achieving that look can involve some rather painful and peculiar practices. Forget your favourite Instagram filter. This is old-school, high-effort beautification. What constituted beauty in medieval times? Ideals varied somewhat across regions and over the centuries, but certain characteristics were consistently prized for aristocratic women. A high, smooth forehead was considered a mark of intelligence and refinement. Pale, luminous skin, untouched by the sun, which would suggest manual labour, was paramount. Fair or golden hair was often admired, along with blue eyes. A slender, graceful figure, with a long neck and delicate hands, completed the picture. Think of the idealised depictions of ladies in illuminated manuscripts or tapestries, ethereal, elongated, and impeccably pale. It's a look that screams, "I have never ever had to do a chore in my life." Achieving that coveted pale complexion was a major preoccupation. Since a tan was associated with peasantry, you'd go to great lengths to avoid the sun, using veils, wide-brimmed hats, or simply staying indoors during the brightest parts of the day. But to enhance that pallor, or to correct any natural ruddiness, women resorted to various skin-whitening concoctions. A mainstream historical fact is the use of lead-based cosmetics, such as cerus, white lead, to achieve a fashionable pale face. Cerus was highly effective at whitening the skin, but it was also incredibly toxic. Prolonged use could lead to lead poisoning, causing skin damage, hair loss, internal organ damage, and even death. It's a tragic irony. Pursuing beauty could literally kill you. Talk about suffering for your art. Other whitening agents included powders made from wheat flour, rice flour, or crushed bone. Some women would apply egg whites to their faces to create a smooth, glazed appearance, or use concoctions of mercury, another highly toxic substance, to try and bleach freckles or blemishes. Remember our old friend crocodile dung that we joked about as a potential sunscreen? Well, stranger things were certainly applied to faces in the name of beauty. It's a far cry from your gentle, hypoallergenic moisturiser. To achieve that fashionable high forehead, some women would pluck their hairlines extensively, sometimes removing several inches of hair from the front of their scalp to create a more domed and prominent brow. Eyebrows were often plucked into thin, arched lines, or sometimes removed entirely. This, combined with the pale skin, created a rather stark, otherworldly look that was considered the height of elegance. Imagine the time spent each morning just de-hairing your face. Hair itself was a significant focus. While married women usually covered their hair in public with veils or elaborate headdresses, its colour and condition were still important. Fair hair was often achieved or enhanced using various bleaching agents, such as solutions of lye, ouch, stale urine, yes, you read that correctly, its ammonia content had bleaching properties, or mixtures of herbs like saffron, chamomile or gorse flowers, often applied while sitting in the sun to activate the lightening effect. For darker hair, dyes made from walnut husks or other plant materials might be used. Hair extensions or false braids made from human hair or silk were also employed to create elaborate and voluminous hairstyles beneath those towering headdresses. Subtle makeup was sometimes used, though overt or garish cosmetics were generally frowned upon as a sign of vanity or even loose morals, especially for high-ranking women whose virtue was paramount. A touch of rouge on the cheeks and lips, often made from plant extracts like alkanet root or cochineal, crushed insects for that lovely crimson tint, could add a hint of youthful colour. Eyes might be subtly enhanced with kohl or soot to define them. The goal was to look naturally beautiful and healthy, even if naturally involved a fair bit of artifice. A quirky and rather alarming tidbit concerning medieval beauty practices is the use of belladonna, deadly nightshade, eye drops. A diluted solution of belladonna would dilate the pupils, making the eyes appear larger, darker and more luminous, considered highly attractive. However, belladonna is, as its name suggests, poisonous. It can cause blurred vision, sensitivity to light, and in larger doses, hallucinations or even death. So you might have captivatingly wide eyes, but you might not be able to see much, and you might also be tripping balls. Fashion is pain, as they say. Beauty wasn't just about the face and hair. A slender figure was desirable, and while corsetry as we know it from later periods wasn't as extreme, garments were structured to create a smooth, elongated torso. Diet and deportment also played a role in maintaining a graceful appearance. Personal scent was also important. In an age of less frequent bathing and close living quarters, perfumes and pomanders were essential. These were made from musk, ambergris, a whale, byproduct, glamorous, civet, from the glands of a civet cat, and various flowers and spices. You'd wear scented sachets in your clothing, or carry a pomander, a perforated ball containing aromatic substances, to ward off unpleasant odours and project an air of fragrant delicacy. Historians still argue about the extent to which these beauty standards were universally adopted and enforced, or if there was more regional variation, an individual choice, than the prescriptive literature suggests. While idealised images and moralising texts present a fairly uniform picture, personal letters and household accounts sometimes hint at a wider range of practices and perhaps a more pragmatic approach to beauty. Were all royal women religiously plucking their hairlines, or did some just opt for a well-placed veil? So, your pursuit of beauty as a medieval royal woman is a complex and often hazardous undertaking. It involves time, effort, and the use of substances that range from the innocuous to the downright deadly. Your appearance is a constant performance, a visual reinforcement of your status and virtue. The pressure to conform to these often unnatural ideals adds another layer of constraint to your already restricted life. You smile serenely, your skin fashionably pale, possibly thanks to a layer of lead, your forehead impressively high, embodying the era's vision of queenly perfection, all while hoping your belladonna eye drops don't make you walk into a tapestry. You've navigated the perils of childbirth, the pressures of courtly life, and the painful path to medieval beauty standards. You're a queen, a wife, a mother. But in the intricate dance of royal marriage, there's one area where the rules are starkly, brutally, and irrevocably unequal: fidelity. For you, as a royal woman, the expectation of absolute, unwavering chastity and faithfulness to your husband is paramount. For your husband, the king, well, let's just say the goalposts are in a completely different stadium, possibly on a different planet. Your virtue is not just a personal matter, it's a cornerstone of the dynasty's legitimacy. The entire system of hereditary succession, the very foundation upon which your husband's kingdom is built, depends on the unquestionable paternity of his heirs. If there is even a whisper of a doubt about your fidelity, it could cast suspicion on the legitimacy of your children, potentially plunging the kingdom into a succession crisis, civil war, or political chaos upon your husband's death. Your body, particularly your womb, is considered the property of the crown, its purity essential for the continuation of the royal line. It's a heavy responsibility, and one that allows for no margin of error. You're not just expected to be faithful, you're expected to be seen to be faithful, beyond any shadow of a doubt. This means your life is structured to prevent any possible hint of impropriety. Remember that constant surveillance by your ladies-in-waiting? This is a key reason why. They are there not just as companions, but as chaperones, witnesses to your virtuous conduct. You would rarely, if ever, be alone with a man who was not your husband, your confessor, or a very close, elderly, and unimpeachably respectable male relative. Even an innocent conversation, a shared glance, or an unchaperoned moment could be twisted by malicious gossip into something scandalous. The walls have ears, and those ears are often attached to people looking to gain favour or discredit rivals, and a queen's reputation is a tempting target. The consequences for a queen accused of adultery, or even perceived infidelity, were dire. A mainstream historical fact is that accusations of adultery against a queen were often treated as high treason. This wasn't just a marital spat, it was an offence against the king and the state. The punishment could be, and often was, death. This might be a public execution, beheading, burning at the stake, designed to serve as a terrifying example to others. Think of Anne Boleyn and Catherine Howard, two of Henry VIII's wives who were executed on charges of adultery, though the political motivations behind those charges are complex and much debated. Their fates, though from a slightly later period, illustrate the extreme vulnerability of queens to such accusations. Even if the charges were trumped up for political reasons, the crime itself was considered heinous. And it wasn't just the queen who would suffer. Any man accused of being her lover, regardless of his status, would also face a brutal death, often preceded by torture to extract a confession. His family might be disgraced, their lands and titles forfeited. The stain of such a scandal could spread far and wide. So, if you were a queen, even a flirtatious glance or a moment of unguarded familiarity with a charming knight could have catastrophic consequences for everyone involved. It's like walking a tightrope over a pit of vipers, where one misstep means a very public, very messy end. Now, let's flip the coin and look at your royal husband. The king, in stark contrast, often operated under a completely different set of rules. While the church officially preached fidelity for all, the reality for powerful men, especially kings, was often one of accepted, if not always openly celebrated, extramarital affairs. Kings frequently had mistresses, sometimes openly acknowledged, sometimes kept more discreetly. These relationships might be fleeting dalliances or long-term partnerships. The children born from these unions, royal bastards, were a common feature of medieval courts. While they couldn't usually inherit the throne, though some bastards did rise to positions of great power and influence, or even, rarely, made claims to the crown if legitimate heirs were lacking, their existence was generally tolerated. It was a display of the king's virility, his power, his ability to attract and command. Double standard much? Absolutely. It's less. What's good for the goose is good for the gander, and more. Geese get cooked, ganders get a fan club. How were you, as the queen, expected to react to your husband's infidelities? Generally, with quiet resignation and dignified silence. To make a public fuss, to show jealousy or anger, would be unseemly, undignified, and potentially damaging to your own position. It could anger your husband, alienate his affections further, and provide ammunition for your enemies at court. Your role was to maintain your composure, uphold the dignity of the crown, and continue to fulfill your own duties, including providing legitimate heirs. It must have been a bitter pill to swallow, to know that your husband sought companionship and affection elsewhere, while you were bound by the strictest codes of chastity. A quirky, though perhaps not surprising tidbit is the official mistress status that some royal paramours achieved. In some courts, a king's favourite mistress might hold a recognised position, with her own apartments, titles, and influence. She could even become a rival to the queen in terms of political sway or social standing, though her position was always precarious, dependent on the king's continued favour. Imagine having to be polite at court functions to the woman your husband is openly sleeping with, who might even be wearing jewels he gave her that outshine yours. Awkward. Historians still argue about the degree to which queens were able to privately express their displeasure or negotiate terms regarding their husbands' infidelities. While public silence was the norm, did some queens, in the privacy of the royal bedchamber, voice their hurt or anger? Did some manage to exert influence to have particularly troublesome mistresses removed from court? Or were they truly powerless in this domain? The intimate dynamics of royal marriages are often hidden from the historical record, but it's hard to believe that these situations didn't cause significant personal pain and marital strife, even if it was carefully concealed from public view. So, the path of fidelity for a medieval royal woman is a narrow, treacherous one, with deadly consequences for any misstep. You're expected to be a paragon of purity, the unsullied vessel of the royal bloodline. Your husband, meanwhile, often enjoys a latitude that would be unthinkable for you. It is perhaps one of the most glaring and brutal inequalities of your position, a constant reminder that your body, your sexuality, and your very life are subject to a different, far harsher set of rules than those that govern the man whose crown you share. Life as a queen consort, with all its constraints, duties, and the occasional terrifying brush with medieval medicine or beauty standards, eventually comes to a significant crossroads: the death of your husband, the king. This moment, when the man to whom your life has been tethered passes away, can plunge you into a period of profound uncertainty. Will his death bring you newfound influence and autonomy as a dowager queen, or will it render you vulnerable, powerless, and perhaps even a pawn in a new round of dynastic games? Your future suddenly hangs in the balance, and the path ahead can diverge dramatically. The immediate aftermath of the king's death is a period of intense activity, and often political manoeuvring. The succession must be secured. If your son is the undisputed heir and of age, the transition might be relatively smooth. He ascends the throne, and you become the queen mother, or dowager queen. This can be a position of considerable honour and potentially influence. You're the mother of the new king, a figure of respect and experience. Your son might look to you for advice and support, drawing on your knowledge of the court, the kingdom, and foreign affairs. You've been around the block, after all, and probably know where all the skeletons are buried, both literally and figuratively, given medieval castle architecture. In this scenario, you might find yourself with more freedom and authority than you ever had as queen consort. You're no longer primarily defined by your relationship to your husband, but by your relationship to your ruling son. You might have your own dower lands, estates assigned to you for your maintenance as a widow, which can provide you with significant income and a degree of financial independence. You could become a powerful matriarch, a respected elder stateswoman, wielding influence behind the scenes, guiding your son and protecting the interests of your family. Think of formidable queen mothers throughout history who shaped the reigns of their sons. This is perhaps the best-case scenario for a royal widow. However, if your son is still a minor when he inherits the throne, your role becomes even more critical and potentially more perilous. You might be named regent, or part of a regency council, tasked with ruling the kingdom until your son comes of age. A mainstream historical fact is that queen mothers frequently acted as regents for their young sons, and many proved to be astute and capable rulers. This is your chance to wield direct political power, to make decisions that shape the destiny of the kingdom. But it's also a position fraught with danger. Powerful nobles might resent being ruled by a woman, even as regent. Rival claimants to the throne, or ambitious factions within the court, might try to usurp your authority or manipulate your young son. You'll need all your political acumen, courage, and a network of loyal supporters to navigate these treacherous waters successfully. Remember Eleanor of Aquitaine, who, even in her later years, was a force to be reckoned with, safeguarding the interests of her sons Richard and John. But what if you haven't produced a surviving male heir, or if the succession is contested? What if your husband's brother or some other male relative takes the throne? In this situation, your position as a dowager queen can become much more precarious. The new king might see you as a reminder of the previous regime, a potential rallying point for dissent, or simply an expensive drain on the royal treasury. Your influence could evaporate overnight. You might be respectfully marginalised, retired to a remote dower estate, or even encouraged, or forced, to enter a convent to remove you from the political scene. Your comfort and security would depend entirely on the goodwill of the new ruler and his advisors. There's also the ever-present possibility of remarriage. A dowager queen, especially if she's still relatively young and potentially fertile, or if her dower lands are particularly valuable, can be an attractive marriage prospect. Your former husband's successor, or even a powerful noble, might see marriage to you as a way to legitimize their own position, gain control of your lands, or forge a useful alliance. You might have little say in the matter. Just when you thought you might have some autonomy, you could find yourself back on the marriage market, albeit as a slightly used but still valuable commodity. It's like being traded in a high-stakes fantasy football league, where your player stats are your titles and estates. A quirky and rather poignant aspect of royal widowhood was the prescribed mourning period and attire. Dowager queens were expected to adopt sombre, often black clothing, though white was also a mourning colour in some cultures, and maintain a period of public grief. This widow's weeds could be a very restrictive and visible symbol of her status for a long time, sometimes for the rest of her life. While for some it was a genuine expression of loss, for others it might have felt like yet another uniform, another constraint on their freedom, especially if the marriage hadn't exactly been a love match. The fate of your children, if they are not the direct heirs, also becomes a concern. They might be seen as threats by the new regime, or their marriage prospects might change. As a dowager queen, protecting your younger children, securing their futures, and ensuring their safety can become a primary focus of your energies. Historians still argue about the average level of personal security and autonomy experienced by dowager queens in the Middle Ages. Was it generally a period of increased respect and influence, or were they more often vulnerable to political shifts and the whims of new rulers? The reality likely varied enormously depending on the specific political context, the queen's personality and resources, and the strength of her relationship with the new king, especially if he was her son. Some widows thrived, becoming influential figures in their own right. Others faded into obscurity or faced hardship and marginalization. So your husband's death is not an endpoint but a transition. It closes one chapter of your royal life and opens another, one filled with new possibilities and new dangers. You might step into a role of greater power and influence than ever before, or you might find yourself more vulnerable than you've ever been. The dice are rolled anew, and your fate as a royal widow will depend on a complex interplay of politics, personality, and sheer luck. The one certainty is that your life, even in widowhood, remains inextricably linked to the fortunes of the crown. As your life unfolds, whether you are a reigning queen consort, a powerful dowager, or a marginalised widow, another path often presents itself, either by choice, by gentle persuasion, or by outright coercion: the religious life. The convent, the monastery for women, looms large in the medieval imagination and reality, serving as a sanctuary, a dumping ground, a centre of learning, or a place of profound spiritual devotion. For you, a royal woman, the call to piety or the convenience of a prison cell, albeit a gilded one, could lead you through its heavy doors. For some royal women, the appeal of the religious life is genuine and deeply felt. After years, perhaps decades, spent in the secular, often turbulent world of court politics, with its vanities, intrigues, and constant pressures, the cloister can offer a promise of peace, contemplation, and a direct path to God. You might have always been devout, your daily prayers and attendance at Mass more than just a performance. The desire to dedicate your remaining years to spiritual pursuits, to prayer, study, and good works could be a powerful calling. In a world where your choices have often been dictated by others, your father, your husband, the needs of the state, choosing to enter a convent as an act of personal faith can be a profound assertion of agency. You might be trading worldly power for spiritual authority, a crown of gold for a crown of thorns, but for some, this is a liberating exchange. Think of St. Radegund of Thuringia, a Frankish queen who left her husband to found a monastery at Poitiers and became renowned for her piety and asceticism. Convents, especially those with royal patronage or founded by noble women, could also be significant centres of culture, learning, and even subtle political influence. A mainstream historical fact is that many medieval nunneries were important repositories of knowledge, with scriptoria for copying manuscripts, libraries, and opportunities for women to engage in intellectual and artistic pursuits that were largely unavailable to them in the secular world. Abbesses, the heads of these communities, were often powerful figures in their own right, managing vast estates, corresponding with kings and popes, and wielding considerable authority within their own domains. For a royal woman with intellectual inclinations or leadership abilities, becoming an abbess could offer a different kind of queenship, one focused on spiritual and administrative leadership rather than dynastic succession. You could be overseeing not just a household, but a thriving community of women dedicated to God and scholarship. Hildegard of Bingen, a visionary composer, writer, and abbess, is a stellar example of the intellectual and spiritual heights a woman could achieve within the monastic system. However, the path to the convent isn't always paved with pure piety. For royal families, nunneries often served as a convenient and respectable place to dispose of surplus daughters, troublesome widows, or politically inconvenient female relatives. If you are a princess deemed unmarriageable for whatever reason, perhaps a political alliance has fallen through, or there's a physical or mental impediment, real or perceived, the convent can provide a safe, supervised, and honourable alternative to remaining a spinster at court. It keeps you out of the way, prevents unsuitable marriages, and maintains the family's reputation for piety. It's a bit like sending a difficult relative to a very exclusive, very devout boarding school, from which they never graduate. Similarly, if you are a widowed queen whose presence at court is deemed problematic by the new regime, perhaps you're too influential, or you represent a rival claim, or you're simply a reminder of a past they want to erase. You might find yourself encouraged, with varying degrees of subtlety, to take the veil. This encouragement could range from gentle suggestions about the spiritual benefits of a contemplative life, to more overt pressure, such as a reduction in your dower lands or a withdrawal of royal favour, making life outside the cloister increasingly untenable. The convent becomes a gilded prison, a way to neutralise your political potential without resorting to more drastic measures like exile or execution. You get a life of prayer and needlework, and the king gets peace of mind. Win-win, sort of. Life within the convent walls is highly structured, governed by the rule of the specific religious order, Benedictine, Cistercian, etc. The day is organised around the liturgy of the hours, a cycle of communal prayer services sung in the chapel at set times, from matins before dawn to compline at night. In between, there is time for private prayer, religious study, reading the scriptures, the lives of saints, theological commentaries, and manual labour. This labour might involve tending the convent gardens, spinning and weaving. Remember that needlework training always comes in handy. Copying manuscripts in the scriptorium if the nunnery has one, or engaging in charitable works like caring for the sick or educating local girls. It's a life of discipline, obedience, and communal living, far removed from the individualistic pursuits of the secular court. A quirky, and sometimes controversial aspect of some high-status nunneries was the level of comfort and even luxury that could exist within their walls, especially for women from wealthy or royal backgrounds. While the ideal was poverty and simplicity, some aristocratic nuns brought significant dowries to the convent, which could be used to provide them with private cells, personal servants, and finer food or clothing than the general rule might dictate. This sometimes led to tensions within monastic communities and criticism from reformers who advocated for stricter adherence to ascetic ideals. So, your prison cell might actually be a rather comfortable suite with a nice view of the herb garden. Historians still argue about the degree of genuine spiritual fulfillment versus reluctant confinement experienced by royal women who entered convents. Was it primarily a choice driven by personal faith and a desire for a meaningful life outside the constraints of marriage and court, or was it more often a consequence of political expediency and a lack of other viable options? The motivations were likely as varied as the women themselves. Some undoubtedly found peace, purpose, and even power within the cloister. Others may have languished in quiet desperation, their worldly ambitions thwarted, their lives circumscribed by stone walls and endless prayers. Whether you enter the convent as a devout seeker of God, a scholar eager for learning, or a political pawn removed from the chessboard, the religious life offers a distinct alternative to the secular path of a royal woman. It is a world with its own rules, its own hierarchies, and its own rewards and sacrifices. For some, it is a haven. For others, a beautifully appointed cage. But within its walls, many royal women found a unique space to live out their days, their stories woven into the rich tapestry of medieval religious life. We've seen how your official power as a queen consort is often limited, your authority usually derived from your husband or, later, perhaps your son. Ruling in your own right is the rarest of exceptions. But does this mean you're entirely without influence, a mere decorative bystander to the great events of your time? Not necessarily. Even without a crown of your own, or a seat on the King's Council, there are subtle, often indirect ways in which you can exert significant influence, whispering power into the ears of those who formerly wield it. It's less about shouting commands and more about mastering the art of strategic suggestion and well-placed connections. One of the most significant avenues for your influence is through your male relatives, your husband, your sons, your brothers, or even powerful uncles or cousins. Your closest relationship and potentially your most powerful lever is with your husband, the king. If you have built a relationship based on trust, affection, and respect, and that's a big if, given the often political nature of royal marriages, he may genuinely value your opinion. In the privacy of your shared chambers, away from the prying eyes and ears of counsellors and courtiers, you can discuss matters of state, offer insights gleaned from your own networks of information. Your ladies-in-waiting can be excellent sources of court gossip and political intelligence, and gently guide his thinking. You might not be making the final decision, but your perspective can shape it. It's like being the ultimate behind-the-scenes advisor, the one whose counsel he seeks when the formal meetings are over. Your sons, especially as they grow older and begin to assume positions of responsibility, are another key channel for your influence. You are their mother, you have known them their entire lives. They may look to you for guidance, for support, for a perspective untainted by the ambitions of other courtiers. If your son becomes king, your role as queen mother, as we discussed, can be particularly potent. He may rely on your experience and wisdom, especially in the early years of his reign. You can help him navigate the treacherous currents of court politics, advise him on appointments, and mediate disputes. Your influence here is familial, maternal, but no less powerful for it. A quiet word from his mother can sometimes carry more weight than a lengthy speech from a seasoned minister. Even your relationships with your brothers, or with powerful nobles connected to your natal family, can be a source of influence. You represent a link between your husband's kingdom and your own land of origin. You can facilitate diplomatic communication, smooth over misunderstandings, and advocate for policies that benefit both realms, assuming their interests align, of course. Your letters to your family back home, though likely monitored, can convey subtle messages and maintain important connections. You're a living bridge between two powerful houses. Patronage is another powerful, if indirect, tool. As queen, you have the ability to bestow favour, to support individuals and to promote their careers. You might take a promising young knight under your wing, recommend a talented clerk for a position in the royal administration, or support a particular religious order or charitable institution. Those who benefit from your patronage become part of your network, loyal to you and willing to support your interests. A mainstream historical fact is that queens were significant patrons of the arts, literature and religious foundations. By directing resources and bestowing prestige, they could shape cultural trends, promote specific religious or political agendas, and build a loyal following. This isn't just about being a fairy godmother, it's strategic networking, medieval style. You scratch their back, they support your or your husband's agenda. Your household itself can be a power base. Your ladies-in-waiting, your chamberlains, your chaplains. These are people loyal to you who can act as your eyes and ears in the wider court, gather information, and discreetly advance your interests. A well-managed and loyal household is a valuable asset. However, all this subtle influence is a delicate game. You must be incredibly discreet. To be seen as overtly meddling, as trying to usurp your husband's authority or manipulate your son, is to invite disaster. Your enemies at court, and there will always be enemies, will seize on any hint of overreach to discredit you, to accuse you of petticoat government, or of pursuing your own selfish agenda. You must operate in the shadows, your influence felt rather than seen. It is like being a puppeteer whose strings are invisible. A quirky and illustrative example of indirect female influence can be seen in the courts of love phenomenon, particularly in 12th century France. These were gatherings, often presided over by high-ranking noblewomen like Eleanor of Aquitaine or Marie de Champagne, where questions of chivalry, romance and courtly behaviour were debated. While their direct political impact is debated by historians, these courts undoubtedly shaped cultural norms and allowed women to exercise a form of social and intellectual authority, influencing the ideals and behaviours of the knightly class. It was a way of shaping the men who shaped the kingdom, one poem and debate at a time. Historians still argue about the true effectiveness and reach of this informal or indirect power wielded by royal women. Was it a significant factor in medieval governance, or merely a peripheral activity, with real power remaining firmly in male hands? It's difficult to quantify, as much of this influence was exerted privately and left few direct traces in official records. However, the consistent efforts by male authorities to control and limit female influence, through Salic law, restrictions on female regency, or moralising tracts against meddling women, suggest that it was perceived as a real and potentially potent force. They wouldn't try so hard to suppress it if it wasn't a concern. So, while you may not hold the sceptre directly, your hands are not necessarily idle. Through your relationships, your patronage, your intelligence networks, and your sheer persistence, you can subtly shape events, influence decisions, and leave your mark on the kingdom. It requires immense skill, patience, and discretion, but the whispers of power from the Queen's chambers can, at times, resonate as loudly as any royal decree. You just have to know how, when, and with whom to whisper. Your life as a royal woman, while often confined within castle walls and circumscribed by courtly ritual, is not immune to the brutal realities of the wider medieval world. War, siege, and political upheaval are recurrent themes of the era, and when conflict erupts, it doesn't politely stop at the castle gates. You might find yourself, quite unexpectedly, on the front lines of a very different kind of battle, one where your courage, resilience, and leadership are tested in the crucible of violence and deprivation. Forget the gentle jousts and tournaments. This is the real, terrifying face of medieval warfare. Imagine the scene. Your husband, the king, is away on campaign, or perhaps he has fallen in battle, or maybe your castle is a strategic outpost suddenly besieged by enemy forces. The familiar sounds of courtly life, The music, the laughter, the rustle of silks are replaced by the chilling blast of war horns, the shouts of attacking soldiers, the thud of siege engines hurling, massive stones against your walls, and the screams of the wounded. You, the queen, or perhaps the chatelaine, the lady of the castle, are now the highest-ranking authority within these besieged walls. The safety and survival of everyone inside, your children, your household, the garrison, the terrified townsfolk who have sought refuge, rests squarely on your shoulders. It's a sudden and terrifying promotion to Commander-in-Chief, whether you ask for it or not. Your first task is to maintain morale. Panic is contagious, and in a besieged castle, despair can be as deadly as any enemy weapon. You must project an image of calm, courage, and unwavering resolve, even if your own heart is pounding with fear. You'll move among the defenders, offering words of encouragement, tending to the wounded, drawing on that rudimentary knowledge of herbalism you might have picked up, and ensuring that resources are managed effectively. Your presence, your visibility, your refusal to show fear can inspire the garrison to fight harder and the populace to endure longer. You become a living symbol of resistance. A mainstream historical fact is that many noblewomen found themselves in command of castles during sieges, and some acquitted themselves with remarkable bravery and skill. They would direct the defence, organise supplies, dispatch messengers, a perilous task, to seek help, and even negotiate with the enemy. These weren't delicate flowers wilting at the first sign of trouble. Many were formidable leaders who understood the grim realities of warfare. Think of Black Agnes, Agnes Randolph, Countess of Dunbar, who famously defended Dunbar Castle against an English siege for months in the 14th century, taunting the besiegers from the battlements. She wasn't just serving tea, she was directing a war effort. Life under siege is a grim catalogue of hardship and suffering. Food supplies dwindle, you'll institute strict rationing, counting every loaf of bread, every side of bacon. Water, if the castle's well is within the walls and secure, is precious. If not, or if it becomes contaminated, thirst becomes a terrible tormentor. Disease, fueled by overcrowding, poor sanitation and malnutrition, can sweep through the besieged population, often claiming more lives than enemy action. The constant bombardment from trebuchets or mangonels, the threat of mining beneath the walls, the fear of an all-out assault, it's a relentless psychological and physical assault. You'll sleep little, your ears straining for any change in the enemy's tactics, your mind racing with contingency plans. You might even find yourself directly involved in the defence. While you're unlikely to be clad in full-plate armour wielding a broadsword, though some tales might suggest otherwise, you could be directing archers, organising the pouring of boiling water or hot sand, or less pleasant substances, onto attackers trying to scale the walls, or ensuring that breaches are quickly repaired. Your ladies-in-waiting, too, might find their needlework skills temporarily repurposed for making bandages or repairing leather armour. It's an all-hands-on-deck situation, where traditional gender roles blur in the face of existential threat. Forget courtly etiquette. Survival is the only rule that matters. If the siege drags on for weeks or months, the choices become increasingly stark. Do you try to hold out, hoping for relief that may never come? Do you attempt a desperate breakout? Or do you negotiate a surrender? Negotiation is a perilous art. You need to secure the best possible terms for your people. Safety from massacre, perhaps the right to leave with their lives and some possessions, while not appearing too eager or too weak. Your own fate, and that of your family, will be a key bargaining chip. Will you be taken hostage, ransomed, or worse? A quirky and rather grim detail of siege warfare was the psychological tactics employed. Besiegers might catapult diseased animal carcasses, or even the heads of captured messengers, into the castle to spread disease and terror. They might parade prisoners within sight of the walls and execute them to break the defenders' morale. It was brutal, and you, as the leader, would have to witness these horrors and try to keep your people from succumbing to despair. Imagine trying to rally your troops after they've just seen their comrades' heads launched over the wall. Not exactly a pep talk from a Disney movie. Historians still argue about the extent to which women's active participation in siege defence was a common occurrence or an exceptional circumstance, often romanticised in later chronicles. While tales of warrior queens and heroic chatelaines abound, were these the norm, or were most women in besieged castles primarily victims, enduring the suffering passively? The truth probably lies somewhere in between. Exceptional women certainly rose to the occasion, while many others undoubtedly suffered terribly, their experiences largely unrecorded. If the castle falls by assault, the consequences are often horrific. The victorious soldiers, fired up by battle and promised plunder, might run amok, leading to massacre, looting, and widespread violence against the civilian population. As the ranking noblewoman, you would be a prime target for capture, ransom, or abuse. Your best hope would be a negotiated surrender before things reach that desperate pass. Even if you are not directly besieged, war in your kingdom or neighbouring lands brings its own suffering. Your estates might be ravaged, your tenants killed or driven off, your income disrupted. You might be forced to flee your home, becoming a refugee. You will certainly be expected to contribute to the war effort, perhaps by raising funds, supplying provisions, or offering your castles as garrisons. The shadow of war is long, and its impact is felt by everyone, even those in the highest echelons of society. Your brutal life takes on a very literal meaning when the trebuchets start flinging rocks at your breakfast nook. Throughout this journey, we've seen you largely navigating a life defined by expectations, constraints, and the will of others. Your father, your husband, the church, the state. You've been a pawn, a consort, a mother of heirs, a manager of households, perhaps even a subtle influencer behind the throne. But what happens if you, a royal woman in medieval times, decide that's not enough? What if you dare to defy the norms, to challenge the status quo, to grasp for power more openly, or to live life on your own terms, even if those terms fly in the face of convention? This is the path of defiance, and in the rigid, hierarchical world of medieval royalty, it is a path fraught with extreme peril, often leading to a brutal downfall. Perhaps your defiance stems from a refusal to accept a politically expedient but personally repugnant marriage. You might resist, plead, or even try to flee, only to be met with increased pressure, confinement, or the wrath of your family who see your personal desires as insignificant compared to the needs of the dynasty or the kingdom. A disobedient daughter is a liability, an embarrassment. Publicly defying your father's will in such a fundamental matter could lead to your disinheritance, your confinement to a remote nunnery, not the scholarly, influential kind, but the isolated, punitive kind. Or being married off by force to an even less desirable suitor as a punishment. Remember, you are an asset, and assets don't get to have opinions about their deployment. Or maybe your defiance comes later in life, as a queen. Perhaps you tire of your husband's infidelities and dare to publicly rebuke him, or even more dangerously, take a lover yourself. We've already discussed the dire consequences of a queen's adultery, treason, execution. But even a less extreme form of marital defiance, such as openly challenging your husband's political decisions, forming your own rival faction at court, or refusing to play the role of the demure supportive consort, can have severe repercussions. He is the king, his authority divinely sanctioned, or so he believes. To challenge him is to challenge the natural order. This could lead to your political isolation, the loss of your household and income, confinement, or even accusations of witchcraft or conspiracy if your opposition becomes too threatening. It's amazing how quickly strong-willed queen can become evil sorceress trying to bewitch the king when it suits the narrative. Consider the queens who tried to rule too overtly, or who are perceived as usurping their husband's or son's authority. A mainstream historical fact is that queens who were seen as too ambitious or politically aggressive often faced intense backlash from the nobility and the church, who were deeply invested in maintaining male authority. Figures like Queen Isabella of France, wife of Edward II of England, who, with her lover Roger Mortimer, overthrew her husband, ultimately faced a complex legacy. While she acted to end a disastrous reign, her methods and her own subsequent power grab were viewed with suspicion and ultimately led to her own downfall when her son, Edward III, came of age and asserted his own authority. Power, once seized, is hard to hold, especially if you're a woman who took it by unconventional means. What if your defiance is religious? Perhaps you embrace a heretical movement, or challenge the authority of powerful churchmen. The church is a colossal power in medieval Europe, and to cross it is to invite condemnation, excommunication, and potentially the full force of an inquisition or crusade. A royal woman might have some protection due to her status, but if her defiance is persistent and public, Even that might not be enough to save her from censure, imprisonment, or worse. The Church values pious, obedient daughters, not rebellious theologians in tiaras. Even defiance in smaller, more personal ways can be risky. Refusing to conform to courtly etiquette, dressing in an unconventional manner, pursuing unfeminine interests like scholarship too openly, or forming friendships deemed inappropriate, all these could mark you as eccentric, willful, or even dangerous. The pressure to conform is immense, and any deviation from the norm is noted and often criticised. You are a public figure, and your behaviour reflects on your entire family and kingdom. Keeping up appearances isn't just a social nicety, it's a political necessity. A quirky and rather tragic example of defiance leading to destruction can be seen in the stories of some prophetesses or female mystics who gained a popular following but then fell afoul of authorities. While some, like Hildegard of Bingen, navigated these waters successfully, others who claimed divine revelations that challenged the established order, or who gained too much independent influence, could be accused of fraud, heresy, or witchcraft, and brutally suppressed. If such a woman had royal connections, it could be deeply embarrassing or even dangerous for her family. Historians still argue about how to interpret acts of defiance by royal women. Were they truly challenging the patriarchal system, or were they operating within it, using the available tools, even if unconventional, to achieve personal or dynastic goals? Was a queen who plotted against her husband a proto-feminist, or simply an ambitious politician playing a dangerous game? The motivations are often complex and layered, and our modern interpretations can sometimes obscure the medieval realities. The price of open defiance is almost always high. You might gain a temporary victory, a brief moment of autonomy or power, but the system is designed to resist and crush such challenges from women. Your story, if you choose this path, is more likely to end in a tower, a convent, exile, or on the executioner's block than in triumphant independent queenship. The narratives written about you by contemporary, male chroniclers will likely cast you as a villain, a Jezebel, an unnatural woman who overstepped her bounds, thus justifying your downfall. Your defiance becomes a cautionary tale, a warning to other women to stay within their prescribed roles. Yet, despite the overwhelming risks, some royal women did choose to defy. They fought for their children, for their beliefs, for their own survival, or perhaps simply for a taste of freedom in a world designed to confine them. Their stories, though often ending tragically, are a testament to their courage, their resilience, and their refusal to be mere footnotes in a history written by men. They remind us that even within the most rigid structures, the human spirit can, and sometimes does, rebel. And so, your life, whether one of quiet conformity, subtle influence, or bold defiance, eventually draws to a close. Like all mortals, you face the finality of death. Perhaps you die young, a victim of the perilous childbirth we've explored, or swept away by one of the many diseases that stalked medieval castles, the sweating sickness, plague, or a raging fever for which no cure existed beyond prayers and perhaps a dubious herbal concoction. Or maybe you live to a ripe old age for the era, a dowager queen with decades of experience etched onto your face, having outlived husbands, rivals, and perhaps even some of your own children. Regardless of how or when it comes, your passing marks the end of a chapter, not just for you, but for the dynasty and the kingdom you served. Your final illness will likely be attended with all the pomp and piety that characterized your life. Physicians, if they haven't already given up, might try their increasingly desperate remedies, more bloodletting, more strange potions. Your confessor will be a near-constant presence, preparing you for your final journey, administering last rites, ensuring your soul is as ready as possible to meet its maker. Your family, your children, your closest attendants will gather around your bedside, their grief perhaps mixed with calculations about the future. Even in death you are a significant figure. As you lie on your deathbed, what thoughts might occupy your mind? Do you reflect on the sacrifices made, the duties fulfilled, the children born, the alliances secured? Do you recall the homesickness of your youth, the strangeness of a foreign court, the weight of the crown you shared or perhaps briefly held? Are there regrets, moments of joy, the faces of loved ones, lost or living? It's a life lived under extraordinary pressure, a life of immense privilege and equally immense constraint. Once you breathe your last, the machinery of royal mourning and succession kicks into high gear. Bells will toll across the kingdom. Your body will be prepared for burial, often a complex and ritualized process. It might be embalmed, a practice common for high-ranking individuals to preserve the body for a lying in state and the journey to its final resting place. You will be dressed in fine robes, perhaps with symbols of your rank, a coronet, if not a full crown. A mainstream historical fact is that royal funerals were elaborate, public spectacles designed to reinforce the legitimacy and continuity of the dynasty, and to honour the deceased's status. The funeral procession itself could be a grand affair, journeying from the place of death to the chosen burial site, often a major cathedral or a royal mausoleum associated with your dynasty. Imagine Westminster Abbey or the Basilica of Saint-Denis, final resting places for generations of royalty. Your burial site will be a place of significance, perhaps beside your husband, or in a chapel you patronised or founded. A tomb will be commissioned, possibly an effigy tomb with a life-size sculpture of you in repose, an idealised image for posterity. This effigy, carved in stone or bronze, might depict you in your royal regalia, hands clasped in prayer, a serene and noble expression on your face. It's the final public presentation of your image, carefully crafted to convey piety, dignity, and royal status. No messy deathbed scenes here, just eternal airbrushed perfection. But what of your true story, your inner life, the complexities of your experiences? This is where things become hazy, your narrative often shaped and sometimes deliberately distorted by those who write the histories. Medieval chroniclers were almost exclusively men, often clergy, writing with their own biases, political agendas, and patrons to please. They might praise you fulsomely if you conform to their ideal of a pious, submissive, and fertile queen. They might laud your charitable works, your devotion to your husband and children, your impeccable virtue. This is the good queen narrative. However, if you were a queen who stepped outside those narrow bounds, if you were too politically active, too independent, too foreign, or if you were on the losing side of a political struggle, the chroniclers could be merciless. Your actions might be twisted, your motives maligned. You could be portrayed as ambitious, manipulative, immoral, or even wicked. A quirky, or rather telling tidbit is how often a foreign queen who became unpopular was accused of witchcraft or poisoning by chroniclers, convenient scapegoats for a kingdom's ills. These negative portrayals could solidify into accepted historical fact, obscuring the real woman behind the caricature. Your reputation, your very legacy, is largely in the hands of men who may have never met you, or who saw you only through the lens of their own preconceived notions about what a queen should be. Historians still argue about how to recover the authentic voices and experiences of medieval royal women from these often biased and incomplete historical records. It requires careful reading between the lines, a critical examination of the chronicler's motives, and the use of other sources where available. Personal letters, though few survive, household accounts, wills, artistic depictions, and archaeological evidence. It's like piecing together a complex mosaic from scattered and sometimes deliberately broken fragments. So, as your story fades from living memory into the pages of history, it is often simplified, sanitized, or sensationalized. The brutal realities you faced, the terrifying childbirths, the constant scrutiny, the lack of personal freedom, the crushing weight of expectation, might be glossed over in favour of a more romanticised or a more vilified image. The nuances of your personality, your intelligence, your fears, your private sorrows and joys, these are often lost, buried beneath the weight of your royal title and the agendas of those who recorded your life. Your voice, unless you were one of the very rare women who wrote her own story, like Christine de Pizan, though she was not royal, or the letter-writing Paston women, is largely silent, interpreted and relayed by others. You become a name in a genealogy, a queen mentioned in connection with a king, a mother of a future ruler. Your individual struggles and triumphs, the unique tapestry of your lived experience, risk being subsumed into the grand impersonal narrative of dynastic history. The brutal life you endured, with its flashes of splendour and its deep wells of sorrow, is filtered, reshaped, and passed down, a story not entirely your own. The stone effigy on your tomb might lie serene for centuries, but the real woman, the one who lived and breathed and navigated the treacherous currents of medieval royalty, is a far more complex and often elusive figure. Her fading story is a poignant reminder of the challenges faced by those whose lives were lived at the intersection of immense privilege and profound powerlessness. Now, as the torches in our medieval castle begin to dim and the echoes of the past grow softer, let us begin to ease back from this often harsh and demanding world. The weight of crowns and the burden of dynasties can be left behind as we prepare for a more gentle transition. The lives of these royal women, filled with such stark contrasts of splendour and suffering, offer a profound glimpse into a time so different from our own, yet their human experiences of hope, fear, love, and loss still resonate across the centuries. Allow the stories to settle, the images to soften. The relentless demands and constant scrutiny they faced can now give way to a sense of quiet contemplation. The cold stone of their castles can melt into the warmth of your present comfort, the flickering torchlight into the gentle glow of your room. Their struggles are over, their stories, as best as we can tell them, have been told. Let peace settle over their memory and over you as you drift towards your own rest. Sweet dreams.